Chapter 21. I will deal with him myself. A loud voice was heard coming from the left. Everyone turned to the side to stare at the person who had just arrived. Gustav, who was walking forward earlier, heard the voice and felt it sounded familiar. He stopped and turned around to look at spectating students move aside for a male student to pass through their midst. Gustav recognized the face of the brown-skinned bulky male approaching. He was a large dash. "Oh my goodness, isn't that Paul Miguel?" Dash. "It is him." Dash. "But I don't see Ben and Hung Jo anywhere around." Some of the students exclaimed as Paul walked towards Gustav. "Oh, it's you. I don't have time to waste with someone I have already defeated," Gustav stated and turned around to continue walking. "You bastard, where do you think you're going? I will make sure I crush you here and take back my pride," Paul exclaimed with a look of rage while increasing his walking speed. "Maybe you should call the remaining two to join you before approaching me," Gustav said as kept walking. "This time won't be like the last, trash. No matter what drugs you use, it will still be to your loss. I am sending you to the hospital this time," Paul stated fiercely. Gustav turned back around at this point to stare at Paul. This confidence is because Gustav scrutinized Paul from head to toe as he spoke. "This time I will show the entire school that trash can only remain as trash," Paul added as he suddenly dashed towards Gustav. The explosive outburst of speed shocked Gustav greatly because Paul wasn't as fast as this in their earlier battle. Gustav quickly reacted by swerving to the right to dodge Paul. Paul almost made contact with him due to the suddenness, but he was able to dodge it nevertheless. It seems he managed to channel his bloodline through the fourth point. That means, he's now a Zulu-ranked mixed blood, Gustav analyzed with a slightly surprised look. This was where Paul's confidence came from. He, Hung Jo, and Ben Rao all stayed away from school since the cafeteria incident happened. They dreaded coming to school since Gustav made their reputation go down the drain. They couldn't bear to imagine the kind of embarrassing ordeal they'll have to go through with students pointing at them and laughing while also making fun of them behind their backs. The trio had been diligently training and trying to channel their energy past the fourth point so they could come back and deal with him. When a mixed blood finally managed to become a Zulu ranked, the strength of the said mixed blood along with their abilities will increase. The three of them believed when they got to this rank, they would have the strength to defeat 10 of Gustav even if he was using enhancement drugs. Paul was the first to achieve this, which was why he was in school today. "Don't run, you bastard! Fight!" Paul said as he dashed towards Gustav once again. Gustav managed to swerve to the side once again, dodging Paul by a few centimeters. Their speeds were nearly the same. Gustav's normal speed was only higher than Paul's by a notch. "As much as I would love to have a go with, I can't get into any fights until after my punishment, so you should stop embarrassing yourself before you end up like these monkeys." Gustav didn't even need to point before everyone understood who he was referring to. The faces of the 7 that tried to attack him earlier burnt with embarrassment and anguish. "You bastard, you just want to wriggle your way out of beating. I will not let you," Paul stated and dashed out once again. "It's not like you can catch me anyways." Gustav swerved towards the side. "I haven't activated my bloodline yet. When I do, you'll be sorry," Paul stated. "And I haven't activated my dash yet. When I do, you'll never be able to touch me," Gustav said internally, but then he remembered something. "The last time there was a hidden quest when I got into a fight with those 3. What if the system has issued another one?" Gustav pondered as he recollected the last encounter. "Wait!" Paul suddenly heard Gustav speak after pausing his steps. Paul didn't know why, but he decided to wait just as Gustav had demanded. "You want to redeem yourself, then I will battle with you, but not here." Gustav decided to compromise. "Let us fight outside of the school premises after I finish my work for today," Gustav proposed. "Huh! Why would I want to fight you outside? I want to crush you right in front of everyone." Paul had a look of strong disagreement as he spoke with hate. "It's obvious you only want to beat me right now because I can't fight back. Is that how you're gonna get your dignity back? By beating up a person who can't fight back?" Gustav emphasized with a look of disappointment. Paul wanted to retort when he heard the voices of the students surrounding them speaking. Dash. He doesn't even want to duel on proper terms. Dash. Now he wants to fight the trash when the trash will not be able to fight back due to school punishment. The students gave him disappointed glares as they murmured amongst themselves. Paul had an embarrassed look as he heard their statements. Gustav decided to play it this way so he could drill it into the minds of everyone that if they battled here he wouldn't fight back, which would spell an easy win for Paul. Paul's win would be a shameful one since it would be a claim to winning without Gustav putting up a fight. Normally Paul would not give a damn, but he was trying to win back his dignity, and this wouldn't be the best way to go about it. Fine, we can battle outside of the school premises. Our battle will be recorded and uploaded on the net for everyone to see, but how can I be assured that you will show up? For all I know, you might just turn tails and run after you're done with your work for today. Paul agreed but wasn't quite trusting that Gustav would show up. I will show up, Gustav said with confidence. Even if I don't, you can come back tomorrow to beat me up within the school premises, Gustav added. Paul squinted his eyes as he stared at Gustav with suspicion. Bolin Group Construction Site 7. Paul spoke as he turned around to walk away. Meet me on the top floor by 6 p.m., Paul added. Paul decided to compromise because if Gustav decided not to show up after his work was over, he wouldn't have any excuses to give the next day if Paul decided to come and trouble him again. If Gustav decided to give the same excuse after failing to show up, Paul could decide not to listen and just beat him up regardless of whether he fought back or not. Gustav stared at Paul, who was walking in the opposite direction. I hope the three of them will be there together. It will make it easy for me to push my plans forward. After these thoughts finished playing in Gustav's mind, he turned around to start heading towards his initial destination. The crowd dispersed with chatters as they discussed how the fight was going to be. A lot of them speculated that Gustav would use whatever drugs he had used earlier on to battle, but when they remembered the confident look on Paul's face, they guessed he had something up his sleeves. Chapter 22. Gustav had left the scene several minutes ago. He got the cleaning equipment from the cleaning lounge and was currently heading towards one of the sporting facilities for mixed bloods. Today he had about 7 different locations to clean before he would be done for the day. He also wanted to return the history books he lent the other day in Miss Amy's name, so he would check if they were other volumes. He reckoned that it would be late in the evening before he was done with the activities for the day. Gustav didn't use Dash since students were still all over the place. Dash had increased in power so much now that if he was seen using it, they would think he had awakened another bloodline, so he decided to keep it on the low for now. His normal speed was fast enough to cause small gusts of wind around him. Even with the large cleaning equipment in his hand, he still kept running. 2 hours later, Gustav had cleaned 6 out of 7 places and was currently headed towards the 7th. He had goosebumps as he thought about the building he was currently headed to. Teacher's Block C. This was the same place he cleaned the other day and also the same place where Miss Amy's office was located. I hope she doesn't find out about the books. This were Gustav's train of thoughts as he arrived in front of the familiar cream-colored 2-storied building. He walked in immediately to begin his work. He purposely picked this as the last place to visit, hoping he wouldn't come into contact with Miss Amy. He wanted to avoid her totally. Gustav started from the bottom as usual, visiting each teacher's office one after the other and performing the clean-up duty. It only took Gustav another 30 minutes to finish cleaning every office within the building except for that of Miss Amy's. He was currently in the corridor that led to her office. He had just finished cleaning the teacher's office that was beside hers. He turned left to stare in the position of Miss Amy's office door for a few seconds before turning around to leave. She has probably left for home, but just in case she's around, I have to leave this vicinity as fast as possible. Gustav had these thoughts as he quickened his pace and left the building through the stairs that he was already used to. Upon exiting the building, Gustav started running towards the cleaner's lounge to go drop the cleaning equipment. What he didn't know was inside the teacher's building in Block C, a pair of beautiful eyes with azure-colored pupils stared at his departing figure from the blinds positioned on the wall. Several minutes later, Gustav had dropped the equipment and was ready to leave. He bolted across the school grounds with his regular speed, headed towards the main entrance of the school. It's high time I finally tried that. This was Gustav's train of thoughts as he departed from the school premises. It was already past 6 in the evening at this time. The building Gustav and Paul were supposed to meet was located about 7 miles southeast of the school on the city map. Gustav only had to enter one teleportation circle and travel for about 5 minutes more on foot before he got there. It was in between a business class area and a residential area in the city. What appeared in Gustav's line of sight when he arrived there were both tall and short buildings. The place they had picked for their battle was a construction site that had been abandoned for a while. The buildings within the premises were all uncompleted. There were small electric fences that were in form of blue lines barricading the entire surrounding. These blue lines were about 7 feet high. If a person made contact with it, they would be electrocuted and be paralyzed for about 3 hours. Also, the cops would be alerted, which means the person would be caught. Gustav walked towards the back of the construction site. He wanted to enter from that side so he wouldn't be spotted. Gustav stared at his surroundings, properly checking for the people within the area. Luckily for Gustav, this area was sparsely populated. After a few more seconds, he squatted for a bit before jumping. Tum! He leapt more than 10 feet in the air, crossing over the blue lines fences. Plom! He landed within the construction premises and started walking towards the nearest uncompleted building. There were about 5 tall uncompleted buildings positioned close to one another. The building in the middle was the tallest. From the looks of things, it was around 100 stories high and was as wide as an entire street. Only God knows what they were trying to build, but it was pretty large. Construction materials could be seen within the premises, with some unknown machines scattered all over the place. Most of them had humanoid looks. As Gustav walked towards the building in the middle, he could see a silhouette standing in the distance very close to the uncompleted building in the middle. On closer inspection, there were actually 3 silhouettes. Gustav could see Hung Jo, Paul Miguel, and Ben Rao standing side by side. Just as usual, Hung Jo was standing in the middle with his usual haughty attitude. He saw Gustav approaching and glared at him with hate. Looks like he's in good health. So the reason he was away from school all this time was because of humiliation. Gustav came to this realization. He now understood that these 3 were a bunch of hypocrites. They had been humiliating him all his life, yet they were scared of being humiliated themselves. He made a promise in his heart to rightfully give them punishments today. Last time he was being lenient, but this time, he understood that these kinds of people never learned their lesson. I have to be careful. There's no one within the vicinity. Who knows what they have planned? Gustav had a resolute look as he arrived before them. Are we doing it here? He asked with a cool tone. I hate the tone of confidence this bastard uses when speaking. Hung Jo glared at Gustav with hate-filled look. No, we're heading to the top, Paul stated as turned around and pointed at the building behind. All right. Gustav stared at the building and agreed. He already knew that this was going to be the case since Paul mentioned the top floor earlier in school. Gustav didn't wait for them to enter before he did. He went into the building first. This wasn't because he was stupid or anything, on the contrary, immediately he entered he activated dash. The 3 entered into the uncompleted building and didn't see him. At first they thought he had turned tails and ran until they heard loud tapping sounds coming from the stairways that led up. The 3 didn't even have plans of climbing. They just went to the elevator stand and used the elevator to travel to the top floor. Although the building was uncompleted, it still had stairs and an elevator. Gustav moved with speed to the top floor while checking for irregularities along the way. This was the reason he entered before them. He wanted to use dash to check out the environment just in case of danger. Immediately the dash ended, Gustav got to the top floor. The top floor was vast. It was neatly tiled except for the small debris that could be seen in several parts. There were also some machines in several positions and building materials. A few moments after Gustav arrived, the 3 arrived too. They came walking towards him with a circular device floating in midair. Gustav recognized this device to be a recorder. Your shame will be recorded here, and we shall regain our reputation after posting the video of us defeating you on the net. Hung Zhou shouted out with a crazy look as he pointed at Gustav. Gustav just stared at him with an indifferent look. Can we just do this? I don't want to waste time talking to trash who call others trash, Gustav retorted. You bastard, what did you call me? Hung Zhou wanted to rush forward when Paul and Ben held him from both sides. Young master, remember he uses enhancement drugs. Let Paul take care of him, Ben said from the left side while Paul nodded slightly in agreement. Oh, why did you stop him? Maybe the last ass whooping wasn't enough for him. Hung Zhou must be a masochist since he seems to like pain. Maybe after taking more money from him he'll break more of his bones, Gustav retorted vulgarly. His look now was not one of a scholar who liked to read books, instead it was one of mischief. Hung Zhao's forehead twitched repeatedly in anger as he heard Gustav's words. You bastard, I'll kill you! Hung Zhou shouted out and dashed forward while pulling himself out of the both of them grasp. Gustav smiled in response as he watched Hung Zhou dash towards him while his arm emitted a fluorescent glow. Chapter 23. Paul and Ben had widened eyes as they didn't expect Hung Zhou to suddenly escape their grasp and run towards Gustav. You're dead! Hung Zhou shouted as he arched his right arm back. Light gathered around it, forming a small blade above his fingertips. He quickly stabbed his fingertips forward, towards Gustav's neck upon reaching his front. Unlike before where I'd been dodging and pulling back, this time I shall be the one to land the first hit. As Gustav came to this conclusion, he raised his hand with speed and swung it towards the incoming Hung Zhou. Hung Zhou only saw a blurry hand movement, and before he could stab out completely, Gustav's palm had appeared in front of his face. His left cheek, to be precise. Before he could react, contact was made. Pa! The crisp sound of palm colliding with flesh rang out. Hung Zhou felt a force equivalent to a moving vehicle slam into his right cheek, sending him several feet above the air while puking blood and teeth. Hung Zhou spiraled twice in the air before slamming onto the ground about 4 meters away from Gustav's location. Young master! Both Paul and Ben shouted out at the same time as they ran towards Hung Zhou, who was sprawled on the floor like a dead rat. The left side of his face was swollen and bruised. Ben and Paul bent down to help him before putting a small round orange pill in his mouth. Hung Zhou, who had several of his teeth removed and his face swollen, started healing. The swollen left side of his face and eyes slowly went back to normal, same with his teeth. Gustav stared at his right hand that he just finished using. That felt pretty exciting. Gustav liked the way he felt when his hand connected with Hung Zhao's face. Especially the way his cheeks rippled like waves. It was a feeling Gustav couldn't get enough of, and he secretly wished Hung Zhou would stupidly dash towards him again. You bastard, how dare you hit me on the face? When Hung was finally healed completely, these were the words that came out of his mouth. There is more where that came from. I don't mind feeding you what you feed me all these years, Gustav stated with a look of confidence as he smiled at Hung Zhao's angry face. Young master, leave him to me. After I'm done with him, he will be on his knees begging as he receives judgment from you. Paul snorted as he dashed out. Gustav already pretty much understood the situation and knew only Paul would be able to go against him since he was already a Zulu-ranked mixed blood. As Paul dashed out, the upper part of his body transformed into that of a large bull. His arms became extra thick as he increased to about 7 feet in height. His eyes glowed crimson along with his fist. Compared to his transformation in the cafeteria, Paul looked more fierce this time. Grhhh! He growled in a deep voice as he punched towards Gustav's head. The increase in strength and power was very evident. Gustav reacted by also throwing out his fist towards Paul. His reason for going head-on against Paul like this was to gauge his strength with that of a Zulu-ranked mixed blood. Pow! The two fists collided with intensity, and both of them were pushed back. Paul slid back by 6 feet, while Gustav slid back by about 3 feet. From the first clash, the stronger person was already evident. Paul didn't waste time before furiously running towards Gustav again with another fist outstretched. Their speeds were now on the same level, but Gustav was still a bit stronger than him even though Paul's bloodline was the power type. Pow! 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 The sounds of clashing rang across the air as Gustav and Paul went at it violently. Gustav squatted a little, dodging the swing of Paul's right arm before throwing his upwards in a bid to successfully land an uppercut. Paul reacted in time by quickly pushing his left hand down to block Gustav's punch, yet he was still pushed back a bit as his beastly palm trembled from the force behind the punch. Before Gustav could retract his arm, Paul swung his left leg out towards Gustav's left rib area. Immediately the leg was swung out. Gustav already sensed it, and reacted by jumping 2 meters in the air while doing a backflip. The leg missed him after he jumped backwards. Both of them closed in on each other again by dashing forward. Pow! 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 They clashed again, repeatedly moving from place to place across the rooftop of the uncompleted building. But as the fight progressed, it was obvious that Paul was on the losing side, which shocked him greatly, along with Hung Jo and Ben. How could he still be stronger than Paul? Paul is now a Zulu-ranked mixed-blood, for goodness sake. They both had these thoughts as they witnessed the fight. They didn't want to believe it, but now they were starting to realize that they might have stepped on a landmine, because no enchantment drug was able to make a Zero-ranked mixed-blood stronger than a Zulu-ranked mixed-blood. Especially if that mixed-blood was supposed to have a bloodline lower than F grade. Impossible! Impossible! Hung Jo watched with a look of craziness as Paul got pushed back again and again. How? Why? How? Why? How? Why? How did this trash become more powerful than me? How? Where does he get this strength from? Hung Jo was nearly running mad as he rambled on internally, with disbelief written all over his face. Pow! Gustav finally landed a solid hit on Paul's left rib area. KRRYCCH. Cracking sounds rang out. The force pushed Paul several feet backward. Gustav, who had already gotten the advantage over him, didn't relent, and dashed forward again, brandishing his fist. Pow! 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 The last fist landed on his tummy area, catapulting him backwards again. Blurg! Paul held his tummy side as he puked out small drops of blood. He had used the force of Gustav's last fist to push himself backwards, leaving about a 20 feet space in between him and Gustav. This way he could react on time if Gustav wanted to dash out again. His chest was heaving up and down as he stared at Gustav like he was looking at a monster. Gustav was still breathing steadily, which showed he wasn't worn out in the slightest. He stretched out his right arm and made a waving motion. Come now, don't tell me you're having cold feet. Are you scared of this trash now? Gustav questioned with a slight smile. Paul, use it now! Hung Jo suddenly shouted out. Gustav didn't understand what they were getting at until he saw a blue rounded pill appear in Paul's hand. Flick! Paul quickly threw the pill into his mouth and swallowed it down. Gustav felt wary upon seeing the action of Paul, as his instincts told him that wasn't a healing pill. Just as he thought it truly wasn't a healing pill. Grhhh! Paul growled in pain as his skin became hot red. The tusks protruding from both sides of his mouth became longer as he grew taller in size. That should be one of the enhancement pills they have been mentioning. Gustav could sense the increase in power that Paul's transformation was bringing him. Now this will truly be your end. Kill him, Paul! Make sure he doesn't survive! Hung Jo shouted with a look of madness. Grhhh! Paul growled as he stared at Gustav's face with his crimson eyes. Zoom! Paul bolted forward with speed while swinging out his left arm towards Gustav. Gustav, who had already sensed the attack before Paul closed in, quickly moved to the left as his body slanted to dodge the attack. Chapter 24. Because he moved at the same time Paul swung his hand, he was able to dodge it by a hair length. But before Gustav could completely return his body to a normal position, Paul had already raised his knee with force. Paul's right knee was currently headed for Gustav's stomach, and there was no way he could dodge it in time, so Gustav quickly placed both of his arms in front of himself to block the knee. Bang! The knee slammed into Gustav with explosive force, throwing him into the air in a backward motion. Crack! Gustav's wrist bones had cracked from the impact as he flew backwards with a slight look of pain. Regeneration has been activated. As he traveled in an arc across the air, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Paul had already dashed out again towards Gustav as he was still being sent flying across the air. His fist headed for Gustav's stomach as he descended. Gustav, who was still in midair, saw the fist coming towards his stomach, and with no way to counter it, he finally activated dash. "Activate dash," he said internally. The fist approaching suddenly slowed down a bit. Gustav stretched out his hands towards the fist and pulled himself upward using it. Using that to jump forward, he was close to colliding with Paul's upper body. He suddenly raised his knee with force. Blam! Gustav's knee slammed into Paul's jaw, stopping his initial movement. Paul was dumbstruck by the sudden hit as he stared forward, only to see that Gustav had disappeared. "Huh!" He turned around with a dumbfounded look only to receive another hit. Blam! Gustav threw a punch to Paul's face. The punch wasn't as effective as earlier due to Paul's increase in strength, but it was still heavy. Blam! 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 Gustav's speed was too fast for Paul to follow, so he kept getting punched repeatedly. By the time he would throw his fist out, Gustav would have dashed towards his back. This happened until dash time was exhausted and Gustav went back to normal. The narrative changed again as Gustav became on the receiving end without the speed of dash. Gustav kept evading and receiving punches as he thought of ways to deal with Paul. "I can only use dash one more time." Gustav was thinking about how to make dash effective because at his current strength level he wouldn't be able to make Paul pass out within that 10 seconds of repeatedly pummeling him. Pow! Gustav received another hit, sending him tumbling towards the edge of the rooftop. He nearly fell from the top of the 100-story building. He stared at the bottom with a look of fear as he remembered the mountain. He quickly came back to his senses, remembering that he was still having a fight, but as he stared forward back, Paul had already arrived in front of him. Grab! Paul grabbed him by the neck and lifted him. Gustav started punching and jabbing to no avail. Paul moved forward while clutching Gustav's neck. Gustav was now hanging by his neck and also hanging from the edge of the rooftop. "This is where your life will end," Paul stated as he moved slightly forward again. Gustav stared at the below with a visible look of fear on his face. He was currently thinking of a solution as fast as he could. He still clenched onto Paul's hand with both his hands while trying to free himself. Paul arched back his left hand as he tightened his fist. "Goodbye," he uttered. Just as he wanted to throw his fist forward, Gustav spoke, muttered something. "Add all 5 points to strength." Paul, who didn't hear what he said, clearly paused his fist and asked, What did you say? Your last prayer?" "Plus 5 points have been added to strength." Gustav suddenly felt a rush of energy coursing through his veins immediately after the notification popped up. If he could see his biceps, he would be able to witness the physical change it went through in a blink of an eye. "Well, you must have said your prayers finished by now. Goodbye." Just as Paul swung his fist, Gustav spoke in his mind, "Activate dash." Swoon! The fist traveled towards him in slow motion again. Gustav clenched on the hand of Paul tightly, causing him to release his grip. Still using that same hand, Gustav swung forward like a monkey and landed several feet in front, on top of the roof. Paul's fist phased through thin air without making contact with flesh like he expected. He noticed that Gustav had disappeared from his front again. "Only 8 seconds left, so I have to make it count." Gustav's words only lingered in the air. By the time Paul heard it, a punch was already headed towards his jaw. Bang! This time the sound was way louder than before as the tiles under Gustav's feet cracked due to the immense force generated back to his body after his fist collided with Paul's jaw. Paul hadn't expected it to be this powerful, so the force not only shocked him but also overwhelmed him. Paul was catapulted backward with blood and teeth flying out of his mouth. By the time he came back to his senses, he noticed that the rooftop was no longer in his line of sight. Instead, he could see the top of a tall, uncompleted building gradually getting farther and farther from him as an intense breeze blew through his body. "Huh! I'm falling?" These were the last words he uttered before his large body slammed against the hard cold ground. Plop! Gustav's chest was heaving up and down as he stared at his right fist. Did I just kill a person? Gustav walked towards the edge of the rooftop and stared at the human body on the ground covered in a pool of blood. Hung Joe and Ben stared at Gustav from behind. Monster! You're a monster! You have killed Paul! The both of them voiced out with a scared look. At first, Gustav was very scared as the concept of killing a living thing was very new to him. He wanted to say it was an accident, and it truly was, but then he remembered that this same person was trying to kill him a while ago. He turned around and stared at the two of them with a dark and devilish look. No one knows about what has happened here except for the both of you and that recording device over there, which I will destroy now. Gustav spoke as he started walking towards them. The both of them flinched, and Hung Joe quickly brought out his device and tried to call a number. Swoosh! Gustav suddenly appeared in front of him and kicked the rectangular device away from his hand. Crash! The device slammed into the ground and broke into fragments. Now you both, actually you three, but the other one is dead now, so you both have made me suffer, made me wish for death, make me hate my existence. Wouldn't it be fair for me to return the favor? Gustav looked like he had absolutely lost his mind at this moment, as he grabbed both of them before they could run. No! Kaiar! Cries of pain enveloped the place as sounds akin to slaps and punches rang out. About 10 minutes later, when the skies were starting to darken, Gustav stood in front of Paul's body that had its head cracked. Paul would have survived had it not been that he transformed back into his human form before making contact with the ground. Gustav squatted and placed his hands on Paul's body to lift him when several notifications popped up in his line of sight. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete 87%/100%. Host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline is 87%. Does host desire to steal this bloodline, yes/no? Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the familiar notifications. Chapter 25. Does host desire to steal this bloodline, yes/no? Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the familiar notifications. Is it because of his blood? Gustav wondered as he stared at Paul's blood-soaked body. He quickly disagreed with his thoughts because when he was battling with Paul the other time, he had already made contact with Paul's blood, but the system notification didn't pop up. I must use this opportunity to figure out what the requirement for bloodline acquisition is. He dropped Paul's body and squatted while inspecting it. What's that? He noticed something on Paul's neck area. What's with that color? It looks crimson, but why does it glow? Gustav noticed the blood oozing from Paul's neck was different from the normal blood. It was glowing crimson. The glow wasn't a very bright one, but it was visible. It made the blood look like jam. Thick but glowing and oozing out slowly. I have never seen this type of blood. Could that be why? Gustav didn't waste time before touching that part of Paul's corpse again. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete 87%/100%. Host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline is 87%. Does host desire to steal this bloodline, yes/no? The same notifications as earlier appeared one by one in his line of sight again. It truly is. Gustav had a lot of thoughts going up in his head right now after confirming that this was a requirement for bloodline acquisition. Yes, Gustav consented to the acquisition of Paul's bloodline. Although Gustav felt he might be disrespecting the corpse this way, he also felt letting the bloodline of a beast go to waste would be a waste. Also, this was a defining moment for him. It was the first time he would be acquiring a bloodline that belonged to another person. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction shall now begin. Gustav saw the same notifications that popped up when he mistakenly tried to steal Miss Amy's bloodline. Miss Amy? Gustav remembered that he met the requirements without needing to touch this weird crimson blood. That means this is not the only way to steal a bloodline. Gustav came to this conclusion as he watched the process of extraction. Bloodline extraction process. 2%/100%. Unlike the other time with Miss Amy, the percentage bar was increasing. Not only was it increasing, Gustav could feel and see the process. His hands that were currently on Paul's neck glowed a bright red-crimson color. A trail of visible crimson veins could be seen on Paul's neck, connecting down to his body below. Gustav was starting to have a feeling of crisis, so he was hoping for the extraction process to be fast because he had someone else's bloodline to steal before leaving. That bloodline will be the most convenient to clean up this mess, Gustav started calculating in his mind. After 2 minutes, a notification rang out in his mind again. Congratulations! Host has acquired Beast Transformation Bloodline. Hidden quest completed. Gustav saw the 2 notifications, but now was not the time to be excited or shocked. The feeling of crisis was becoming stronger every second he spent here. His mind was constantly sending him warning bells, but he couldn't leave here without covering his tracks. He might as well just prepare for jail time or death if he left things unfinished here. He quickly ran back up to the top floor using dash. Internally, he thanked his stars that he didn't distribute the attributes points for the completion of today's task earlier, at school. If he had done that, he wouldn't have been able to escape death. Gustav got back to the top floor where Hung Jo and Ben were laying on the ground passed out. Their 4 limbs were bent in an unimaginable angle. They weren't dead, only passed out, but the look of pain was still visible on their faces along with traces of snot and tears. How I wish I could also steal yours. Gustav took a glance at Hung Jo before moving towards Ben. Your bloodline should be able to help me in fixing this mess. Gustav squatted as his hands reached out for Ben's body. 30 minutes later, Gustav got home. The skies were dark by the time he entered his home. His mind was still chaotic and fuzzy from everything that happened today, but he didn't see anything wrong in what he did. He didn't kill Paul on purpose, but Paul would have killed him on purpose if he didn't fight back. He knew that with this he had caused a major mayhem because Hung Jo happened to be the son of a billionaire. After they find him, they would do everything in their power to catch the culprit, and also try to fix what he did to Hung Jo, but he knew that was impossible. With what he did to Hung Jo, he was sure they could never find a solution for it. Gustav sat inside his tub, and before he knew it, he had slept off. He was already mentally and physically drained from all the events that played out today. He didn't even remember to check the hidden quests and the rewards he received from completing them. Boland Group Construction Site 7 at the top floor of the uncompleted building where the battle took place earlier. A group of men in black tight-fitted bodysuits stood in front of 2 young teenage boys laying on the ground. Yes, we just found young Master Hung with one of his aides, but their situation is a bit hard to describe. One of them was communicating with another person. The small blue glowing button was on his forehead was what made this possible. Their situation is inexplicable. The one with the button on his head squatted to stare at the teenage boys. The both of them had their eyes open, but they looked lifeless. Young Master Hung! The man called out to him while shaking the one on the left. There was no reaction nor answer. The man heard the person on the other end say something which made him react with a surprised look. You're on your way here? 1 month later, just like that, a month had gone by. Gustav was currently headed for school at this time. His mind went back to last month's events as he walked to school. The events that transpired in the last 1 month after Gustav stole a bloodline for the first time were ones he would never be able to forget. After the whole incident at the uncompleted building, Gustav was considered a suspect by the investigators even after everything he did to cover up. It was a real shitstorm. It was all over the news that President Joss' last son had been turned into an invalid. It was on the lips of every media outlet. The president had vowed to crush whoever was responsible. According to the press, he even hired a special team of mixed bloods to investigate secretly. The normal authorities came for Gustav while the special team followed the trail of a popular mixed-blood criminal, Ovalid, who was said to use this style to deal with his victims. Students were there when Gustav was challenged by Paul. The authorities linked Gustav to the incident through that. They asked if he showed up. He denied, of course, and told them he didn't have the guts to appear there. Gustav was taken to the station for the first time. Of course, his parents didn't give a damn and left him to the authorities. Gustav kept explaining to them how his bloodline was trashy and he wouldn't be able to harm any one of them. This was proven when they checked his grade and truly found out that he was an F grade. Gustav was lucky that they didn't ask the school for his initial bloodline grade. The incident at the cafeteria came up. They asked Gustav how he was able to show such strength with his so-called trashy bloodline. Gustav had to admit to using enhancement drugs, which they found plausible. The cops had tried using a technological device that could scan the surroundings of a crime scene and display the events that occurred within the last 24 hours in that said crime scene, but it didn't work. This made them believe that they were truly dealing with a professional mixed-blood criminal and decided to let Gustav go with the last question. Where were you when the incident happened, and who can attest to being a witness to that? Gustav had words stuck in his throat as he racked his brain for a good and plausible lie to come up with. His saving grace was when a particular person showed up at the station. He was with me. He would never forget that sweet feminine voice that was his saving grace. Miss Amy. It shocked Gustav greatly when he saw her appear within the room he was being questioned and also speaking up for him. Miss Amy seemed to have quite the reputation. After she vouched for Gustav, he was immediately set free. He was lucky they didn't use the brain tweak device that was said to pick the mind of a person. Normally this device would make a person's mind visible to them, but they only used it in extreme cases. This was an extreme case, but Gustav wasn't a confirmed suspect after all their investigations, especially when they found out that he had a low-grade bloodline. Logic said he couldn't win against a Zulu-ranked mixed blood with a D-grade bloodline, so the device wasn't used on him. The device was also dangerous to people under the ages of 20. When Gustav was leaving the station with Miss Amy, he ran into a man with dark brown hair clad in a blue business suit. The way the man stared at him made a chill run down his spine. Till now he couldn't forget the glare of the man. He looked like the type of person who didn't value life. Miss Amy played the role of guardian and stood in front of Gustav while glaring back at the man. The man backed down and headed towards the room that Gustav was just released from. He and Miss Amy left the station together, but not a single word was exchanged between them. Surprisingly, the sense of wariness he always felt around Miss Amy had disappeared. "Come to my office after classes tomorrow." She uttered these words before leaving in her hovering green cycle. Gustav remembered that he was still serving punishment, but before he could remind her, she had already zoomed off with her hoverbike. Surprisingly, he got to school the next day and found out that his punishment had been cancelled. His thoughts since that time had been circulating around one question. Just who is Miss Amy? Chapter 26. Just who is Miss Amy? His mind had been circulating around this question. Not only was Miss Amy able to make the cops release him immediately, but she also made the disciplinary committee cancel his punishment. An ordinary teacher wouldn't be able to do that. Although he was feeling a little suspicious about her unknown background, Gustav didn't feel wary about her anymore. After all, she knew what he did that last month. Even though his punishment was over, Gustav still headed to school very early as it had already become a part of him. Boss Danzo gave him a job. It was only part-time, but Gustav earned up to 5,000 rad in the last month. Rad was the currency used in Plankton City. It was comparable to pounds back in the old days. The 5,000 was what Gustav used to disguise whenever he spent the stolen compensation money he got from Hung Jo. I still need to learn how to properly use this bloodline. Gustav slightly raised his right palm as he walked to school. Only Gustav could see the small light above his palm that formed the image of an atom. Ended up turning him into a vegetable instead of what I originally planned. Well, anyway, it all worked out for the best, Gustav thought. I just need to be more careful and subtle next time. If not for Miss Amy's intervention, things might have gone south. I will still need to keep training with it. After all, there are lots of test subjects in school. Gustav arrived at school as he came to this conclusion. He entered and went straight to the school's kitchen. While passing through the corridor on the left, Gustav greeted some of the cooks here. Dash. Hey Gustav! Good morning, Mrs. Carleen. Dash. Good morning, Gustav. Good morning, Aunt Lauren. Dash. Hey little man! Good morning, Sir Dom. Gustav greeted the familiar faces and entered the main kitchen. You're late again, brat. Boss Danzo's voice was the first thing he heard upon entering. Good morning to you too, Boss Danzo. Gustav replied with a smile. Wipe that smile off your face. You may be able to fool young maidens, but not me. Humph. You were masturbating all night, weren't you? Gustav's laughed out loud upon hearing that. Yes, Boss Danzo, I still have your beautiful daughter's picture in my room. Gustav replied. You cheeky brat, get over here. Boss Danzo also laughed as he pulled Gustav over to his side. Boss Danzo had some new recipes to teach Gustav. He went ahead and explained the details while showing him the ingredients needed. After all was said and done, Boss Danzo moved to the side to watch Gustav work. Gustav was like a machine with the way he moved. He was so fluid in cutting, adding spices, washing, boiling, frying etc. Watching him from the side made Boss Danzo feel a sense of pride. If only this lad would just become my successor, I would proudly be able to beat my chest anywhere. Boss Danzo muttered with a slight look of disappointment. He had asked Gustav about this before, but Gustav turned him down already. Boss Danzo kept asking, but Gustav's answer was still the same. Gustav never knew Boss Danzo had such a thick skin until Boss Danzo cooked one of the most exotic and delicious meals specially for him and asked again after Gustav had finished downing all the food. Gustav had a look of guilt when he turned down Boss Danzo again. Boss Danzo decided to ask him what his plans for the future were. I would like to join the MBO. When Boss Danzo heard this reply, he was nearly heartbroken. Son, I don't mean to pour a cold bucket of water on your head, but that dream might just be an impossible one. Boss Danzo replied. Boss Danzo remembered that Gustav had a low-grade bloodline and didn't want him to keep facing the humiliation he had always been going through. This was the second reason for his proposal. Of course, the first was because of his assimilation and talent for cooking. With the life of a chef, there was no need to fear being discriminated against. Either was there anyone who would bully him. He wouldn't have to get acquainted with people who could be potential backstabbers. Son, it's good to have dreams, but chasing some kind of dreams could end up tearing you apart, physically and mentally. Boss Danzo added. Being a chef might be a simple life, but it isn't a treacherous road filled with deception and discrimination. Gustav felt like something was welling up underneath his eyes upon hearing Boss Danzo's speech. He had never been as moved as the way he at that time. No one had ever spoken to him with so much concern for his future. There was no dishonesty, no underlying schemes or anything, just pure concern for another person's well-being. It made him feel some kinds of emotion that he had already buried deep down. At the time of the conversation, Boss Danzo was surprised to see Gustav suddenly bow. Thank you, Boss Danzo. Hey kid, what AR? I'm sorry, but I have made up my mind to go on that path. Be it full of treachery or discrimination. I will overcome all. The confidence in Gustav's voice when he spoke shocked Boss Danzo greatly, because from what he heard, Gustav was supposed to be a wimp. That's a true man right there. Boss Danzo placed his hand on Gustav's shoulder. It's all right. Your resolve is admirable. Boss Danzo added. Gustav smiled in response. I will not waste the opportunity this power has granted me. The opportunity to reach the top. Just don't overdo it. If you feel it's becoming too difficult, you have a place to run back to with me. Boss Danzo ended their conversation with this. Ever since that time, Boss Danzo hadn't disturbed Gustav about being his successor. He had decided to fully support him in whatever way he could, which was why he gave him the job, regardless of the opposition of others. He observed Gustav from the side and muttered, This lad seems to be growing very fast. He noticed the school uniform that Gustav wore was tightening around his body, and also the slight budge around his arms. Looks like pumping him with a lot of food was a good idea. Boss Danzo had a pleased look as he spoke. Truly, Gustav's body had become bulkier within the past 2 months. His height, which was around 48 earlier, was now about 53. His increase in growth was obvious. As his face grew more handsome, his look became colder. His attitude was slowly turning to be like that of Miss Amy. In the middle of the day, they had extracurricular activities. The students in Class 3 were asked to head towards the mixed blood training hall. Normally, Gustav wouldn't have access to the training hall, but after the incident, Miss Amy also found a way to make the school grant him access to it. They were taught the basics of how to use their bloodline abilities properly in a fight. Of course, Gustav was still keeping things on the low, so whenever they had extracurricular activities like this, he only watched the teacher's performance and registered some of the training in his mind. He would never join the students in any form of sparring because he was sure he wouldn't be able to hold himself from beating them up. Things were still the same as before. Gustav still got cold treatment from a lot of students, but he wasn't bothered by it anymore. Secretly, he hoped someone would come looking for his trouble so he would have another bloodline to steal. He didn't want to have to join them for the extracurricular activities, but according to Miss Amy, he could train here, hone his abilities, and test out his strength. There were small personal rooms within the training hall where a mixed blood could train separately without being watched. It would seem that Miss Amy secured one for him, and he had used it the 2 times he was here last. Gustav stood in front of a large square-shaped piece of equipment. It was being held up by a pole that extended from above. The surface of this equipment was pitch black. Huff! Gustav breathed in and pushed his body backwards a bit while arching his right arm back to the limit. His posture right now looked like that of a person learning martial art. His back was curved in, his buttocks shot out, and his legs spread wide apart. Pho! He breathed out and thrust his arm forward with force. Pow! His fist made contact with the square-shaped equipment, causing a loud ringing sound. Trang! 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 Numbers started appearing on the surface of the square-shaped board. 1,000. 1,500. 2,500. 3,500. 4,000. 5,000. 6,000. The numbers came to a stop after reaching 6,200. Gustav stood straight and stared at it. The power of my punch is equivalent to 6,200 pounds now. Gustav held his chin as he contemplated. That's an increase of 500 in the past 1 week, but if I were to use the beast transformation bloodline coupled with my normal strength, it should shoot higher than this. Gustav wanted to try this when he remembered something. Miss Amy is gonna kill me if I don't become a Zulu-ranked mixed blood today. On remembering this, he sat down on the smooth floor. I have to channel my bloodline through the 4th point today, he said, and proceeded to close his eyes. Chapter 27. I have to channel my bloodline through the 4th point today, he said, and proceeded to close his eyes. Gustav had learned a lot about bloodline channeling these past 2 months. To keep increasing in the ranks of bloodline, meditation is necessary. Meditation where you'd have to channel your bloodline repeatedly for hours so it could keep multiplying and increasing in quantity and quality. The training was also necessary and repeated use of your bloodline abilities. Gustav focused and let his mind reach the deepest parts of his body inside. He was able to sense where the 3 bloodlines in his body, but he was only after channeling his original bloodline through the 4th point today. After a few minutes, the sound of bubbling water could be heard inside the small room. Puru! 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 If a normal person walked in here, they would think a person was boiling water. Only a mixed blood would understand what that sound meant. The sound was coming from Gustav's body. A few moments later the sound stopped, and Gustav opened his eyes. That was surprisingly easy. Gustav held his chin as he spoke out loud. He had successfully channeled his bloodline through the 4th point. He thought it would take at least a few hours, but to his surprise, it took him only 10 minutes. Maybe it's because it has saturated, but I haven't been paying attention to it, Gustav said as he stood up. Right now he could perceive the increase in strength within his body. After channeling the blood through the fourth point, he noticed a strange phenomenon happen within his body. The 4 channel points connected together, forming a small circle. According to what he had heard, crossing to the next rank had to do with the circle formed. Well, anyway, I'm a Zulu ranked mixed blood now, which means I have met the requirement for participating in the MBO entrance exams. Thinking to this point, Gustav had a rush of excitement forming within him. I only have to stay low-key for now, but once that entrance exam begins, I will go wild, Gustav muttered with an excited look. Let me test out my new strength. Gustav smiled as he turned to face the square-shaped board hanging in midair. Gustav adopted the pose he used earlier on, arching his arm back to the limit, gathering his strength into that arm, especially his fist, and thrusting it out with full force. Pow! The sound of collision rang out again, this time like a knockout as Gustav's fist collided with the board. Trang! 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 Just like earlier, numbers started appearing on the surface of the board. 1,000. 3,000. 6,000. 9,000. 12,000. Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the figures with a look of surprise. That's up to 100% increase in strength. He spoke with a disbelieving expression. Gustav hadn't expected that his strength would go up by this much after becoming a Zulu ranked. His fist weighed around 6,000 pounds before, but now it had increased to 12,000 pounds. He reckoned that if he was as powerful as this when going against Paul the other time, the situation would have gone in a different format. In the process of his contemplation, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Host has completed the goal, reach Zulu rank. Oh, I had a feeling there was going to be something like this. Gustav stared at the notification with a smile. Goal reward, host, genetic transformation bloodline, has been upgraded. Another upgrade, it should have moved up to D by now. Gustav called for the system interface to open up after coming to this conclusion. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop. The red wall appeared in his line of sight and he wasted no time in calling out. Bloodlines. Bloodlines. Genetic transformation bloodline, grade, E+ abilities tied to bloodline frowny face morph, joint movement, size manipulation, beast transformation bloodline, grade, E abilities tied to bloodline frowny face partial mutated bull transformation, atomic manipulation bloodline, grade, E abilities tied to bloodline frowny face disintegration of atomic structures. The beast transformation bloodline was that of Paul's, while the atomic manipulation bloodline was that of Ben. After successfully extracting them, they were reduced to grade E. At first, Gustav was a little bit disappointed, but then he remembered he could upgrade bloodlines with this power, so he knew that with time, the bloodlines would reach their highest potential, becoming more powerful than their original state. Gustav stared at the panel with a look of contemplation. So there's a grade E+. He had expected his bloodline to increase to D grade since it was formerly E. My bloodline seems to have unlocked a new ability. Gustav noticed size manipulation, which wasn't among the abilities tied to his bloodline earlier. Last month, after collecting the bloodlines of Paul and Ben, Gustav received the notification for the completion of a hidden quest. Host has completed hidden quest. Hidden quest details. Acquire a bloodline within the frame of 2 months after receiving this power. Quest rewards, new skill unlocked, sprint, 10,000 EXP, plus 2 attributes points added to all stats, skills and abilities level up, punishment for failure, death. At first, Gustav thought he would complete a hidden quest related to Paul's challenge, but he couldn't have been more wrong when he saw this. When he saw the rewards, he was really happy about it, but when he saw the punishment for failure, a chill ran down his spine. If this was before he confirmed the power of the system, he would have said it was just a bluff, but now that he knew there were no lies related to the system, he was truly scared about the concept of failing a hidden quest without knowing and ending up dying. If I had been a little late in stealing a bloodline, I wouldn't be alive right now. It had been 2 months already since he got the system. If he had chosen to be a wimp and not fight back, it would not have led to the situation of acquiring those bloodlines, and he would be dead by now. It seems this power doesn't want a wimpy host, Gustav thought with a straight face. If that is the case, then I shall become ballsy enough to do all that is required to keep it, and show that I am truly deserving of it. Gustav had sworn to cast his old self aside. He had sworn not to hesitate to do things the way he truly wanted. He had sworn not to back down and run from people like he used to before. 2 weeks after the incident, Gustav completed the monthly quest which upgraded his bloodline from F to E. He had expected that it would be upgraded to D now, but he understood that there was an E+ before upgrading to D. He was at least glad that he got a new ability out of it. Size manipulation. Gustav held his chin as he stood in the middle of the room. The name says it all, but to use it, do I just imagine which size I want to grow to or something? Gustav wondered and decided to try it. He stared at his hand and thought about it growing bigger. After waiting for a few seconds, nothing happened. It doesn't work that way? Gustav held his chin in contemplation. For confirmation, he tried imagining his leg get bigger this time, and the result was the same. It would seem it doesn't work for relative parts of the body, so let me try this instead. Gustav closed his eyes and felt his whole body at once. Increase. Immediately Gustav called out this word in his mind. His body suddenly bloated. Crack him! Crake him! Bone-popping sounds reverberated across the room as Gustav's body grew to a height of over 3 meters. Bulge! 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 His muscles expanded crazily, making him look extremely macho as he kept increasing in size. He could see the floor get farther and farther away from his sight. Bam! His head ended up colliding with the ceiling. Ouch! Gustav exclaimed as he quickly imagined his body becoming smaller so it would stop growing in size. Gustav's body first stopped growing in size before it started to reduce. After a few more seconds, Gustav had gone back to his original form. That was really something. If I hadn't stopped myself, I probably would have kept growing in size. Gustav stumbled forward a bit as he spoke. What's wrong? He held up his hand and noticed that it was blurred in his vision. Warning! Low energy! Warning! Low energy! Warning! Low energy! Gustav heard the ringing in his head and could see the blurry notification in his line of sight. Even though it was blurry, he understood the message it was trying to convey. I set up almost all my Lineage back use of that transformation. Gustav was barely hanging on as he analyzed. Host will go into sleep mode if energy isn't consumed. Host will go into sleep mode if energy isn't consumed. Gustav's vision was turning red as the warning bells kept ringing in his head. Which do I find Lineage? Gustav dragged his trembling body forward slowly as he muttered. The storage device. Gustav came to a realization and brought out a small button inside his breast pocket. Chapter 28. He wasted no time before tapping the surface. Truant! A projection of 4 things was displayed. The first was a rectangular-shaped board. The second was a wad of cash arranged in a neat row. The third was a small briefcase, while the fourth was a piece of oven-like equipment. Gustav tapped on the image of the oven-like equipment, and it appeared right in front of him. It was 2 meters in height. He could feel his consciousness fading away, but he still struggled to open up the large oven-like equipment. Upon opening it up, the space within it had foods of different kinds. Snacks, juicy meats, e.t. Gustav quickly grabbed onto a juicy-looking large piece of meat. He opened his mouth wide and stuffed it inside. Chew! 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 Chewing sounds were heard as Gustav ripped the meat to shreds in seconds inside his mouth. +1 energy point has been recovered. Gustav didn't stop after seeing that notification. There were tons of food inside the oven-like equipment. Gustav brought them out one after the other, and a huge feast began. +1 energy point has been recovered. +1 energy point has been recovered. +1 energy point has been recovered. The way Gustav's cheeks bulged due to the amount of food stuffed and made it look like it would burst open. Nevertheless, he kept stuffing one food after the other into his mouth. Crunch! 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 A mixture of bakes, fries, meat, fish, almost everything could be seen here. Gustav had been keeping a lot of food that he never had the opportunity to taste for almost 10 years. He enjoyed eating a lot and had these foods kept down for easy access. Who knew that they'd come in handy today? In a few more seconds, Gustav had neatly finished the stash of food he kept within the large oven-like equipment. Srv! The doors behind slid up and a female sporting long gray hair could be seen walking into the room through it. She was clad in a yellow long coat, blue top, and mini skirt with black pop socks. She had a look of indifference written all over her face as walked in gracefully and lightly. Gustav stood up from the floor upon noticing her presence. "Miss Amy?" he muttered while gulping down the food in his mouth. "Hey, we'll leave." Miss Amy was in the process of speaking when she noticed something. "Why are you naked?" she questioned while glaring at Gustav. "Huh? Naked?" Gustav asked with a confused look before turning his head to look down. His eyes widened and he quickly covered his little brother, which was exposed. When he used size manipulation earlier, his uniform was ripped to shreds. He didn't notice at that time that he was naked due to low energy. "Miss Amy, why didn't you knock?" Gustav's face was currently beet red as he stood behind the large oven placed in the middle of the room. "Why would I? I paid for this room after all," Miss Amy stated. "Gustav, why is this place in such a mess?" Miss Amy questioned as she walked further. She noticed the large oven-like equipment in the room and also the slightly cracked ceiling. "Miss Amy, would you leave so I can, put on some clothes?" Gustav asked with a look of embarrassment. "Why? Just go ahead and put on something if you want to, I'm not stopping you." Miss Amy replied with an indifferent look and sat on the bench placed beside the wall. "Gustav, you have forgotten so soon about when you barged into my office. Didn't you also see my nakedness?" Miss Amy added. "Miss Amy, you have forgotten that you nearly killed me." Gustav pointed at himself as he spoke. "And I didn't see everything," he wanted to add this, but he decided to keep quiet. True, if you have the strength you should come and try to kill me also." Miss Amy folded her arms while staring at Gustav as she proposed. Gustav nearly puked out blood. "She's such a bully." Miss Amy had a straight look on her face, she didn't even look bothered in the slightest. "Well, I will just close my eyes for a few seconds, use that time to cover your disaster," Miss Amy stated and proceeded to close her eyes. "Disaster? What does she mean by disaster?" Gustav's face was still red as he quickly picked a cloth from the storage device. In the blink of an eye, he had already worn the cloth. He was now putting on a clean-looking sky blue jeans trouser and a red hoodie jacket. "Phew!" he sighed in relief after covering up and raised his head to stare at Miss Amy. Miss Amy's eyes were wide opened. Miss Amy, since when have those eyes been open?" Gustav flinched back in shock as his face became red again. "Who knows? I already saw your pitiful-looking thumb, so it doesn't matter," Miss Amy replied with a casual look. The way she said it with such aloofness made Gustav want to sink into the floor. "Let's go," Miss Amy said and proceeded to stand up. Go where?" Gustav questioned with a dumbfounded look. "The dojo," Miss Amy answered without turning around. "But school activities aren't over yet," Gustav replied with a confounded look. "Have you forgotten what today is?" Miss Amy said. Gustav stood in place for a few seconds before his face shone with understanding. "Oh, I remember today is supposed to be Parents and Teachers Meeting Day." Gustav recalled that days when this meeting was held, school activities would end earlier. He had already been in here for 1 hour, so he wasn't aware that school activities had ended for the day. Students were currently heading to their homes. The parent and teachers meeting never involved the students, so they were free to leave if they wanted to, though some usually waited for their parents. Miss Amy stared at Gustav, trying to note his expression when he mentioned the parents and teachers meeting. "All right, let's go, Miss Amy," Gustav said while walking forward. Gustav didn't need to ask Miss Amy why she wasn't attending the meeting when she was a teacher, because he knew she didn't like such gatherings. According to her, seeing all those parents act all rich and mighty gave her the urge to spit on their faces. He doesn't seem as concerned as he used to, or is he hiding it? Miss Amy watched as Gustav walked towards her with a look of contemplation. Gustav didn't seem bothered that his parents wouldn't attend the meeting to represent him, which surprised Miss Amy because Gustav always shown a kind of sad reaction whenever anything related to his parents was mentioned. They left the small training room and arrived at the corridor that led outside the hall. Students could be seen walking out also. They stared at Miss Amy and Gustav moving together. Some of them still had looks of bewilderment even though it had been happening for the past month. Most of them still wondered why Miss Amy would bother associating herself with the so-called trash of the school. Even when a lot of talented students tried to impress Miss Amy, she was never interested in any student. She had no favorite students or any of those things that other teachers did, which was why they were surprised when she suddenly started showing interest in Gustav. No one spoke a single word about this since Miss Amy was present at the moment. They didn't want to get on her bad side. Gustav and Miss Amy arrived outside the hall and proceeded to climb on her hover bike that was parked outside. Gustav held on to Miss Amy's waist from behind as she started the engine. Swoof! There was no noisy sound, instead it sounded smooth. The hover bike lit up from behind and streaked into the distance, carrying them both. The winds blew Gustav's hair to the back as he held on to Miss Amy, who was currently speeding with the hover bike. Swee-eye! Swee! Swee-eye! They passed by the sides of several vehicles moving on the road as they sped off. They were supposed to be wearing helmets, but Miss Amy hated helmets. According to her, it spoilt the thrill. As Gustav found out more and more about her, he was starting to realize that Miss Amy was a weirdo, but who was he to judge? His whole life had been nothing short of cringe. In a few minutes they arrived in front of a large 700-story building at the southwest of the city. This building was the tallest in this particular part of the city. It looked like a business building because a lot of people could be seen going in and out of the building. 4 big muscular men stood at the entrance. Miss Amy parked by the side. She and Gustav walked towards the entrance. The men bowed towards Miss Amy when they spotted her walking up the stairs with Gustav. Gustav was familiar with this environment because he had been coming here with Miss Amy for the past month. Gammy Dojo occupied the top 3 floors of this building. Miss Amy had been bringing him here for training. "Welcome, young miss," the men spoke at the same time. Miss Amy nodded softly and handed a cube-like metal towards one of the bulky men. The man received it and walked towards Miss Amy's hover bike while Gustav and Miss Amy walked into the building. Chapter 29. The interior of the building was well designed. There were counters on the north and east sides of the ground floor. Female receptionists could be seen at the counters. The ceiling was designed with blue and marguerite-colored tile that blended well together. Small circular white glows were lined up in rows across the ceiling. A holographic projection of a female in a green business suit was placed in the middle. The female face beamed with smiles as she welcomed the arrival of people into the building. Miss Amy and Gustav headed towards the corridor at the northeast corner of the first floor. They walked through it before arriving at the elevators. The transparent doors slid open and both of them walked in along with 3 other people. Just when the doors were about to close up, a man clad in a red and black striped jacket used his hands to stop it from closing up. The man stared at Miss Amy with a smile as he walked into the elevator. He was sporting shoulder-length black hair and putting on a pair of yellow sunglasses. He had a slightly large build and a tough look, but the way he smiled at Miss Amy was creepy. "Ha, Amy, what a pleasure to see you didn't back down to challenge." He had a wide grin on his face as he pushed the people standing in front to the side with his body. They all glared at him but didn't have the guts to say anything. He walked towards Miss Amy, who didn't even bother to spare him another glance after seeing who it was. "Shove!" He used his body to shove Gustav towards the side so he could stand in their midst. Gustav was now standing close to the transparent glass walls on the left side. After forcefully putting himself in their midst, the man turned to the side to stare at Gustav with a threatening look. "Brat, prepare to lose today," he said to Gustav before turning back to face Miss Amy on the left. "When he loses, remember our bargain." He grinned as he moved his face close to Miss Amy's cheek. Miss Amy, who didn't speak a word since his entry, finally muttered something as her nose twitched. Such foul breath! The man's face twisted upon hearing that, but before he could retort, Miss Amy walked towards the front. Let's go, Gustav, we're gonna use the other one, she said, and tapped on a button which caused the elevator to open up. Gustav nodded and walked towards the glass doors. He can't win! The man in sunglasses shouted out as they walked out of the elevator. This foul breath will be what your lips will taste soon, the man's sunglasses stated with a confident look. We shall see about that. Miss Amy didn't even bother turning around as she spoke. She and Gustav left the elevator to enter the other one beside it. The man in the other elevator gritted his teeth with annoyance. That brat! I will make sure he is dealt with so I don't see him around you anymore. He spat as the elevator glowed up. A circular blue light descended from above and surrounded them. In a blink of an eye, everyone disappeared. The elevators within these buildings weren't ordinary. They were teleportation elevators that would beam them to their desired floor. Anything that had to do with spatial travel was very expensive, that even a lot of wealthy people couldn't afford it. This proved just how high-class the building was, even though the teleportation elevator was not comparable to teleportation circles. Gustav and Miss Amy entered into the next one. They didn't speak about what happened a minute ago because it was nothing new to them. Gustav reminisced about the last month when he arrived in Miss Amy's office just as she demanded. You are the reason for Hung Jo and Ben's condition, aren't you? Also, you killed Paul, didn't you? Gustav's eyes widened in fear after hearing her questions upon his arrival. His palms started sweating as he racked his brain for excuses. Don't worry, there's no cause for alarm. I already knew, she stated with her usual indifferent look. Besides, they deserve the punishment they received. You stood up for yourself, which is a right everyone should possess, but this world is full of discrimination. Without power, you will always be at the bottom of the food chain. Oppression, depression, Miss Amy said with a disappointed look. Miss Amy, even with that, I still committed a crime. Why would you help me? Gustav questioned with a baffled look. Because you finally stood up. You fought back. If you had left them to keep doing to you as they pleased, I would never have stretched forth my hand to assist you. I hate weak-minded people. Being physically weak is understandable, but being mentally weak means you can never be truly powerful. Miss Amy's words kept ringing in his ear, mind, and heart. You took the first step to become powerful. I don't know what luck you have received recently that could have helped you to achieve what you did, but it's all right for you to keep it a secret. After all, everyone has a secret or two. Gustav finally calmed down after hearing Miss Amy's explanation and point of view. I will train you and make sure you learn how to use your abilities properly. Miss Amy concluded with that. Miss Amy, I understand now and I'm filled with gratitude, but I also understand that nothing comes for free. What would you want in return? Gustav questioned with a slightly tense look. He had read enough books to understand the concept of the world. Oh, it seems you are really hell-bent on repaying me. What I want in return, hee. Miss Amy smiled as she spoke. Gustav's heart rate increased on seeing her smile. Miss Amy has never smiled before. I hope she doesn't plan to turn me into her slave. When the time is right I will ask. For now, nothing comes to mind, Miss Amy replied as her facial expression went back to normal. Huh! Gustav was surprised at this reply, but he decided to keep an open mind. Even if she wants me to become her slave or make an unreasonable request later, I will become powerful enough to stop that from happening. Gustav was grateful for her help, but he also didn't want to be manipulated. Since that day, Miss Amy had been training Gustav. His usage of strength, speed, and fight skills had improved during the past month. Of course, he didn't let her know that he had other bloodlines within him. He only revealed that his genetic transformation bloodline could increase in grade, which shocked Miss Amy greatly. She told him never to reveal it to anyone, if not he'd be turned into a lab rat. Gustav figured he shouldn't have mentioned it after seeing her reaction, but Miss Amy had done enough for him to give her the benefit of the doubt. When Miss Amy first brought him to Gami Dojo, they ran into the man they just met at the elevator a while ago. John Brown. He was a well-known powerful mixed-blood trainer around here. He was also one of Miss Amy's suitors. According to Miss Amy, he had been bugging her like a fly to go out with him for some time. She always turned him down. When he saw Miss Amy bringing Gustav, he approached them again and found out that Gustav was Miss Amy's student. When he questioned Gustav about his bloodline grade, he was shocked that Gustav was an F-grade mixed blood. He never expected Miss Amy to personally train an F-grade mixed blood. Since then he had been trying to separate Miss Amy from Gustav. He hated seeing Gustav move around with her, and also act casual with her. This man happened to also have a female student that he trained in the dojo. He issued a challenge to Miss Amy 2 weeks ago, that both students would duel one another. He proposed that if his student won, Miss Amy would get rid of Gustav and go on a date with her. Miss Amy agreed after bringing forth her proposal. "When Gustav wins, don't ever come closer than 10 feet around me." The kind of confidence she had in Gustav was really surprising. This was why Gustav made sure he channeled his bloodline through the 4th point today. He also wasn't fond of John Brown and his female student. Since they both treated him with contempt, he would like nothing more than to slap both their faces today by winning the duel. Gustav and Miss Amy arrived at the 3rd to the last floor, which was where the teleportation elevator could take them to. There were only 2 more floors above this one. To go up, a person would have to climb actual stairs because there was no elevator to get to the last floor. Hiya! 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 Upon exiting the elevator, these were the sounds that entered into their eardrums. It was like they had arrived at a different place entirely. Chapter 30. A patch of grasses and flowers could be seen planted in the environment. The ceiling was constructed in such a way that a person would think they were outside the building. The ceiling looked like the blue skies. Small bungalow-like buildings made of wood could be seen around. These bungalow houses had white sliding doors with black lines plastered on them, forming rows and columns. This place was larger than 10 stadiums joined together, so it was able to house other structures. Nevertheless, it was surprising to see that structures like this could be built in a business building. The environment gave off an ancient vibe to Gustav. When he first arrived here, he was very shocked, but he also found it to his liking. Even though it looked ancient, there were still some technological types of equipment put in place. There was a bloodline grading device standing at a corner. There was also a power output device and some other pieces of equipment out in the open. The sounds that they heard when they arrived here were coming from the small bungalow structures constructed with wood. This place was Gami Dojo, a prestigious place for training mixed bloods in the city. It was also very expensive. Teachers usually rented one of the buildings to teach their students here extra time. Teachers who did this also charged the parents of the kids, but Miss Amy paid for everything herself. Most of the kids that come here were also spoiled brats, so Gustav had never associated with them since he started coming here. The environment was conducive for teaching mixed bloods and enabling them to learn faster. Equipments, materials, and other different things were provided here to also help the students train well. Master mixed blood trainers existed within this building. Miss Amy and Gustav headed towards the stairs. They always had their sessions on the last floor, so that was where they were headed. Anytime a person saw Miss Amy, they would greet her by saying, "Good day, young miss." This sounded like a casual greeting, but they would also give a standing bow while greeting. This made Gustav more suspicious of Miss Amy's background, which she never revealed to him. He figured she must have been coming here for a long time. After climbing the stairs for a few minutes, they arrived at the top floor. Unlike the 2nd and 3rd to the last floors, this floor wasn't crowded or packed with many of those bungalow buildings. They were only about 10 in number, and the atmosphere gave off a soothing feeling. The 3 floors were built using some energy crystals. The energy crystals help mixed bloods in meditation, especially to channel their bloodline faster. The higher the floor, the better the service. Miss Amy and Gustav went towards the dojo on the east side. The design was pretty luxurious and beautiful flowers could be seen surrounding it. They slid the doors to the side and walked in. The interior was just like how a dojo would look. But it was mixed with both modern and ancient types of equipment. It had a weapon rack at the side where katanas, sabers, and some combination of a sword and gun could be seen. The floors looked wooden, but the truth is, they are harder than titanium yet still soft to the feet. Miss Amy went into the changing room. Gustav walked up to the front where some weights could be seen. There were blue-colored steel weight-lifting plates placed on both sides of the rods, also some other steel weight-lifting plates stacked upon each other by the side. They were in different sizes, but Gustav moved closer to one carrying about 6 weight plates on both sides. Gustav held his chin as he thought of something. I haven't completed today's task, Gustav muttered and proceeded to squat. He placed his right hand on the metallic rod holding the weight plates and lifted it. Gustav lifted it with ease, carrying it above his head. The last time he came here he couldn't lift this weight because it weighed more than 1,000 kilograms. He opened the system interface as he did this to check his progress. Quests, daily today's task, 1/3. Travel 120 kilometers, status, 116/120 km. Climb to a height of 806 meters, status, 806/806 m. Carry a total of 2,450 kilograms, status, 1,200/2450 kg. Gustav purposely didn't lift anything today just so he could figure out how much this weighed so he could use it to calculate his current strength. 1,200 kilograms. I don't feel sore, but also I can tell that if I add more plates to this it would only struggle to lift it after some time. Gustav lowered it. Let me see how fluid I can be with this. Instead of lifting it normally, Gustav held it like a baseball bat. The only difference was, he was still holding it with one hand. Swing! 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 He swung the weight several times casually. After doing it more than 10 times, he stopped. I can probably go 50 more times before my stamina runs out. Gustav's reason for doing this was to properly gauge his current level of strength. Daily task completed. 2/3 carry a total of 2,450 kilograms. As he was dropping the weight back to the ground, Miss Amy walked out of the changing room. She was dressed in a butter color and red yukata. Butter color for the top and red for the bottom reaching her feet. Her aloof expression added a certain kind of charm to her current look, also her cleavage was partly exposed, proving that Miss Amy wasn't small in any way. She stared at Gustav dropping the weight. Oh, you can lift that now? Did you already channel your bloodline through the 4th point? Miss Amy figured it out immediately. Gustav nodded in affirmation. That's quite a big leap in strength, Miss Amy stated with a contemplative gaze. I doubt there's a Zulu rank mixed blood that could easily lift that without having a kind of strength-related bloodline, Miss Amy added. They'll take that as a compliment, Miss Amy. Gustav smiled as he replied. Strength isn't everything though. Always remember a well-skilled mixed blood can easily deal with a mixed blood who doesn't know how to use their strength properly, Miss Amy stated before turning around. Do not fear the man who has practiced 1,000 techniques only once. Fear the man who has practiced one technique 1,000 times. Miss Amy's method of complimenting me is really weird. Gustav sighed after hearing Miss Amy's speech, even though he knew it was right. I have been training you on your areas of weakness. Highly predictable attacks and movements, leaving too many openings after completing an attack. If you want my compliment, let me see the fruits of your training today. Go get dressed, Miss Amy said as she walked towards the door. Gustav nodded and walked to the dressing room. In about 2 minutes he came out wearing the same clothes as Miss Amy. The both of them walked towards the west side of the floor where a large stage that was half the size of a basketball pitch could be seen. Some people stood around the stage area, mostly young people who seemed to be around Gustav's age. 2 buff men wearing green yukatas also stood at the right. A man and a young female stood on the stage. He and the female were dressed in a yellow and red striped yukata. The female was sporting green back-length hair. She was a 53 beauty, but her gaze was laced with pride. The man started smiling once he saw Miss Amy approaching. This was the same man that they met at the first elevator, John Brown. The female was his student, Aurora Bright. Dash. Is that him? Dash. He looks pretty weak to me. I heard he's F grade, so this duel will be finished in no time. The voices of other students within the vicinity drifted into the ears of Gustav as he walked towards the stage with Miss Amy. His look was indifferent, almost like he didn't hear them speak. They arrived before the stage and walked up. Oh, good thing you didn't run, but you can still accept that date proposal before Aurora puts him in the hospital. John Brown smiled sheepishly as he spoke. Chapter 31. Please read the author's note below. I wish to correct some misunderstanding. We don't have time to waste here, so let's get to the point. Samzuma Bola, my student is ready for the duel. Miss Amy turned to the two men clad in green yakuta while speaking. All right, we have heard the terms of the duel, and we will make sure that whoever fails between the students keeps up their end of the bargain. The man on the left with a bald head spoke. He was very slim, but he had a deep voice. According to the terms, injuries are allowed. The teacher is meant to take care of the medical condition of their student if they end up receiving any form of injury. Also, no form of bullying shall be tolerated by a teacher once their student loses. The other Gosi spoke. He had white hair and looked fairly tanned with a stout body. Both teachers nodded in understanding. Aurora, go easy on him, he's just an F grade after all, ha ha. John Brown ridiculed before turning around to leave the stage. Gustav, you know what to do, Miss Amy said with a low voice before leaving the stage. Gustav and Aurora, who were several feet away from one another, exchanged glances. Humph, trash that doesn't know his place. I will send you to the hospital today, the female said before standing in a battle pose. Gustav didn't even bother replying to her remark. He stood in position and stared at her. A female once crushed me, never again. Gustav squinted his eyes as he stared at her. Let the duel begin. Immediately those words were uttered from the side, Gustav saw Aurora's body suddenly glow up. Sweeve! In a split second, blue patterns that formed arrows appeared all over the visible part of her body. She stretched out her right hand. Whoosh! Small winds started gathering around it. The small swirling winds were transforming into water. Aurora was turning the air into water and the water into a long blade, but before she could complete it, she saw Gustav suddenly dash forward. He's fast, she thought in her mind as she speedily transformed the water into a 2-foot blade and swung it towards the incoming Gustav. Slash! Gustav, who dashed out the moment Aurora started conjuring her attack, saw the blade swinging towards his neck from the left. Gustav, who happened to be faster than Aurora, pushed out his right palm towards Aurora's wrist, which was still swinging towards him. Pa! Gustav's palm slammed into her wrist, changing the course of the attack, but he didn't stop there. Immediately Aurora lost her balance after her hand was slapped away. Gustav rotated and swung his left elbow towards her face. She was extremely shocked to see Gustav's elbow headed towards her face after he countered her attack. How is he so fast? She wondered, because she could already tell that Gustav was faster than she was from his movements. She was still able to react on time by raising her left arm in front of her face. Bam! Gustav's elbow collided with her arm. Ugh! She exclaimed in pain as the force sent her sliding backward by 7 feet. SSHHHSSS? Her arm was still held up after the force pushed her back, but it was trembling slightly. Such insane physical strength. How is this possible when he hasn't even activated his bloodline? Isn't he just an F rank? She stared at Gustav with a wary and disbelieving expression as she tried sending more power into her numb left arm. Dash. What is wrong with Aurora? Dash. She just got thrown off by a common F rank. Dash. So lousy she should be winning in an instant. What's she doing standing around? The other young-looking students here chatted among themselves after seeing the first exchange. There were about 16 students who looked to be around Gustav's age gathered here. Even John Brown had a baffled expression on his face. Come on, didn't you say you will send me to the hospital? What are you waiting for? I'm right here, Gustav questioned with a ridiculing expression while staring at her. Humph, don't get cocky. Aurora shouted this out and proceeded to wave her right arm forward. As she swung out the blade made of water towards Gustav, A wave of water was shot out in an arc towards him. Swerve! Gustav dodged to the right, causing the attack to pass by his left side. Aurora didn't stop there, she kept swinging the water blade severally, causing more water attacks to appear out of thin air while flying towards Gustav. Swerve! 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 Even though the speed of the attacks was almost twice as fast as Earth's former fastest man, Gustav was still able to dodge every one of them. The speed of each swing was fiercer than the former, and Gustav knew he couldn't keep dodging for long without using a speed-related skill, so he started using footwork to slowly move forward as he dodged the attacks. Aurora was currently gritting her teeth in frustration after noticing that her attacks didn't connect, even after all the strength she put into it. Bam! Bam! Two of her water attacks slammed into the stage several feet behind Gustav. Even with the toughness of the stage, a 3 inches deep line was cut across it. The patterns on Aurora's body suddenly glowed brighter again as the blade in her hand grew to a length of over 15 feet long. It turned into a large scythe. Gustav could already sense that this attack was a much more powerful attack than before, but due to the size he felt she wouldn't be able to swing it as fast. This was his opportunity to close in the gap. Gustav ran forward just as she swung the scythe made of water towards his left side. To his surprise, the movement of her attack was faster than his movement. Before Gustav could close in the gap between them, the scythe had already arrived before him. Krryycchh. A bone-popping sound rang out as an unimaginable scene played out in front of them. Gustav's body suddenly bent towards the front. His knees allowed him to bend in such a way that his body resembled a pistol that was standing on the ground. Due to this action, he was able to dodge the swing without activating dash. His knee could be seen bending at an unbelievable angle that made his body look like a pistol. The hinge joint could be seen popping from underneath the skin behind his knee. Dash. That looks disgusting. Dash. What in the world? Dash. Is that the ability of his bloodline? They were shocked to see the way Gustav was bent. What in the world is that? Aurora was also having a shocked look as the scythe started reducing in size. Krryycchh. Gustav stood up back as his legs returned to normal. Gustav had just activated joint movement, causing his knee joint to reverse its functions. At that moment his ability to kneel was reversed. Instead of his leg being able to bend towards his butt, it was capable of bending towards in the other direction. He used the force from his dash coupled with that to dodge the attack. Immediately Gustav's body went back to normal. Aurora was already sending out another attack towards him. Chapter 32. The attack passed under him, bringing about small winds that caused his yukata to blow up slightly. Gustav somersaulted in the air as he was landing. His left leg was heading for Aurora's body. Suddenly streams of water appeared out of thin air as he was close to making contact with her. The streams of water were like tentacles. There were about 12 of them that shot out at the same time. They all traveled towards Gustav's body that was still dropping towards the ground. 3 each were headed for his right and left arm, while the remaining 6 headed for his right and left legs respectively. Everyone felt it would be impossible for him to dodge this attack since he was still in mid-air and the tentacles were close to making contact. To their surprise again, Gustav suddenly retracted every one of his limbs and tightened them to his body while folding himself in mid-air. He was practically curled up in a ball-like format as the tentacles passed by his sides, missing him by a hair length. Using this method not only enabled Gustav to dodge the attack but also made him descend faster than the water tentacles could turn back around to attack him again. Blam! Gustav landed back on the stage in a squatting format. Aurora's eyes widened as she quickly called back the tentacles to attack Gustav. Immediately Gustav landed, he wasted no time in swinging out his arm towards Aurora's chest. Swish! His attack was extremely faster than she could call back the tentacles, but just as Gustav's hand was close to hitting her chest, she's a female, it would be wrong to touch her there. Instead, Illinois. In less than a millisecond he concluded and changed the trajectory of his palm. Aurora, who had already conjured a small barrier of water in front of her chest, was shocked to see Gustav's palm swing upwards. Pa! A loud slap resounded in the environment as Gustav's hand collided with Aurora's left cheek. This is more like it, Gustav said in his mind with a sadistic grin as his palm pushed against Aurora's cheek. He could feel some of her teeth forcefully removing from her gum. The heaviness of the slap caused Aurora's cheek to ripple as her entire body was lifted off the ground in a rotating motion. Ugh! Such intense strand gth. I lost? These were the thoughts that drifted into her mind as her body was currently falling to the stage with her legs up and her head traveling down. The left side of her face had 5 bloody fingers imprinted on it. Bang! Her head slammed heavily onto the stage, and she felt her vision fading. A speck of blood coated her head area on the stage. Gasp! Aurora! John Brown ran from his position with a panicky look towards Aurora, who was lying on the stage with a bloodied face and swollen head. Dash. How is this possible? Dash. An F grade winning a B grade mixed blood. Dash. Is he truly an F grade? Chatters could be heard coming from the students surrounding the stage as they stared at Gustav in disbelief. The winner has been decided. Sam Zuma spoke with an authoritative voice. This duel is officially over. Teacher Amy's student has won, he added with a voice of authority. John Brown, who was currently squatting in front of Aurora, glared at Gustav with a look of hate. He brought out an orange pill and placed it in her mouth. Aurora, who had a red face earlier on, slowly started to regain her former look. Her swollen head that slammed onto the stage started to reduce. The bloodiness on her cheeks slowly started to return to its normal color. She could feel her teeth that were uprooted from her gum due to the intense slap slowly grow out once again. In a few seconds, she was healed completely. She opened her eyes properly as she recalled everything that happened a while ago. She was feeling an intense amount of humiliation right now. There's no way I could lose to trash like you. You're just an F grade, she shouted out with a look of hate as she glared at Gustav, who was currently standing on the stage. Pitiful! Gustav uttered these words before turning around to leave the stage. You low-life, fight me again! She shouted out as she stood up and ran towards Gustav. Teacher Brown, control your student! The man with the bald head spoke. John Brown quickly held her back before she could move further than 3 feet. You're just asking for another round of humiliation. Frankly, you're not worth my time since I can't do that. Gustav's voice streamed into her ears, filling her with intense frustration, but John Brown held her back firmly. If only I could steal a B-grade bloodline, maybe I would have indulged you a little bit more, Gustav sighed in his mind as he walked off the stage. Now, in accordance to the terms before this duel commenced, Teacher John is not meant to come closer than 10 feet to Teacher Amy. Failure to hold up to the end of this bargain will result in a permanent ban from entering Gami Dojo. Bola spoke with an authoritative look. Dash. How could this be? Dash. It's a shame to high-graded mixed blood toy. The dissatisfied voices of the students could be heard around the stage. You did well, Miss Amy said with a smile as Gustav walked towards her. Gustav smiled back and stood in front of her. Such level of strength from a first-step Zulu ranked is unheard of. Even Miss Amy was shocked. She had expected Gustav to win, but this was far too easier than she expected. Looks like the MBO entrance test will have a monster participating, Miss Amy thought as she stared at Gustav. Miss Amy, can we leave now? Gustav questioned after noticing that Miss Amy didn't say anything else after speaking the first time. Yes, let's go. She turned around while Gustav moved to her right side. Wait! One of the students shouted out. Miss Amy and Gustav turned around to see who spoke. It was a young male sporting green hair with a slim and slightly tall figure. Supervisor Samsuna, Supervisor Bola, please allow me to take back our pride as B-grade mixed bloods. The male spoke before shouting out. Gustav, I challenge you to a duel! Dash. Oh my, Masuba can't seem to hold back. Dash. Gustav's humiliation is certain, now that Masuba has challenged him. Dash. Trashy F-grade needs to be put in their place. The chatters of the students could be heard again. Masuba, a duel cannot happen without agreement from both sides. Samsuna spoke. Gustav, accept my challenge if you dare! Masuba shouted out after hearing the words of Samsuna. Gustav stared at him for a little while before turning around once again. I refuse, Gustav said and proceeded to keep walking away with Miss Amy. Everyone was dumbstruck. They had expected Gustav to agree to it immediately since boys of their ages tend to get provoked easily. You coward! Do you not have any shame? Accept my challenge! Masuba shouted out to Gustav, who was walking away with Miss Amy. Chapter 33. Trying to use such unintelligible means to provoke me won't work, since, not only would I easily defeat you, I would also get nothing out of it. I have better things to do with my time, Gustav stated from ahead without even turning his back to look. Masuba gritted his teeth in annoyance after hearing that. What if you could get something out of it? Can we make a wager? Masuba shouted out. This time Gustav finally paused his footsteps. Although I can't steal his bloodline, there are things I still need and he can provide them, Gustav smiled as he turned around. A wager sounds good to me, Gustav answered and started walking towards them once again. After a few minutes, Gustav and Masuba stood opposite one another on the stage. Since I don't want to waste time, I might as well end this as soon as possible, Gustav thought internally as he waited for Supervisor Samsuna to give the go-ahead for the duel to start. Masuba stared at Gustav with a wary look. After the fight earlier, he could tell that Gustav wasn't one to be trifled with, yet he couldn't bear the thought of an F grade winning against a B grade. He must have a high amount of strength. If that's the case, I shall not let him get close to me, Masuba analyzed and came to a quick conclusion after replaying the last duel in his mind. What he didn't know was Gustav wasn't putting everything into winning because he decided not to use any speed-related skill earlier. Which is the best to use in this situation? Dash is slower than sprint, but sprint takes more energy points. Only if I don't end the duel on time, so sprint it is. Gustav came to this conclusion immediately. Supervisor Bola decided to speak. Let the duel begin. Sprint activate. Gustav called out in his mind. Sprint has been activated. Host speed will be multiplied by 2. 20 energy points will be expended for every second sprint is activated. Dash 20 EP. Immediately Gustav activated it. Everything slowed down around him, including Masuba that was currently trying to conjure an attack with his abilities. Gustav smiled and dashed forward. Swoosh! In an instant, Gustav had closed in the gap between them and arrived in front of Masuba while throwing out his fist. You're not a female, so I have no qualms with hitting you on the chest, Gustav thought as his arm traveled with intense force towards Masuba's chest. Masuba only saw a blurry figure appear before him with an outstretched fist. He had not even conjured his attack. The duel only started a second ago, and yet he could only watch as the fist made contact with his chest. Bang! Gustav's fist collided with Masuba's chest, causing a loud bone-cracking sound to ring out. Blarg! Masuba vomited out a trail of blood as his body traveled in midair with his back arched out due to the force of the punch. How do yes and F grade have th's moose stringy th? This was Masuba's thought process before landing on his back just a few centimeters outside the stage area in front. Plop! Masuba's eyes rolled to the back as he fell unconscious. He kept vomiting out blood even after fainting. Deactivate sprint! Gustav called out in his mind. Sprint has been deactivated. Silence. There was total silence as everyone stared at the stage area with their jaws hanging loosely from their mouths. What they had just witnessed was something unbelievable. Something that no one would believe if they didn't see it with their very own eyes. An F grade defeated 2 B grade mixed bloods in less than 30 minutes. The second mixed blood did not even last for up to a second before the battle ended in his loss. Everyone couldn't process their thoughts. Even Miss Amy had a shocked look on her usually expressionless face. That outburst of speed is not something a Zulu ranked should not be able to achieve. Miss Amy stared at Gustav with a look of suspicion. Gustav stood on the stage with a look of contemplation. I haven't used it before, but it is very satisfying. Except for the amount of energy it consumes, Gustav thought. Originally his punch wouldn't send a Zulu rank mixed blood flying more than 3 to 7 feet away, but after coupling it with his speed multiplied by 2, the punch packed twice as much force. Masuba ribs and sternum were currently fractured due to the punch. Gustav wins this duel. After many seconds had passed, Supervisor Bola finally broke the silence. Everyone came out of their reverie but still stared at Gustav with a look of astonishment. Dash. How did he manage to defeat Masuba in a single second? Dash. Maybe he's a step 4 Zulu ranked in disguise? Dash. How is this possible when he's just F grade? The students could not wrap their heads around what had just happened. Aurora had widened eyes as she watched Gustav walk down the stage. Doesn't this mean he was holding back when he fought me? It was hard to believe for everyone, but they had no choice since they had seen it happen before their very eyes. Supervisor Samsuna walked towards Masuba that was on the ground and raised his head before putting an orange pill in his mouth. Masuba, who had a pale face earlier, began to heal up back little by little. Mixed bloods could have battles like this because they were tenacious enough to survive even though they received a fatal injury. If this was a normal person, Gustav's one punch would have ended their life in an instant. Masuba slowly opened his eyes after his bones were put back in place, and his broken ribs joined together. Ugh! He blurted out with pain after another broken bone got joined together again. After a few more seconds he stood up. Remember our wager. Now hand it over! Gustav shouted out from the other end of the stage. Masuba had a dejected look as he took out a small blue cube and walked towards Gustav. Here! He handed the cube over to Gustav. Gustav collected it with a smirk on his face. Your donation is appreciated, Gustav said after collecting the cube. He turned around to leave with Miss Amy. Hey! Masuba called out to Gustav with a hesitant look. Gustav paused in his steps as he turned his head to the side to stare at Masuba. Can we put everything behind us and become friends? Masuba proposed. Gasp! The rest of the students gasped in surprise even though they understood what Masuba was aiming at. Friends? Gustav questioned with a confused look. Yes, friends, my father is chief of. Before Masuba could complete his statement, Gustav cut him short. You want to be friends with an F-grade trash? Gustav questioned him with a ridiculing look. No, I mean no, you're not trash, but yes, I want to be friends with you. Masuba stuttered while answering the question. No thanks, trash doesn't want to be friends with you. Gustav turned him down and immediately turned around to continue walking. Everyone was surprised once again. Did he just turn Masuba down again? Everyone knew how Masuba's father was the chief of police in Plankton City. There was no one who wouldn't want to befriend him, yet he was turned down by an F grade. Masuba had a look of humiliation as he watched Gustav leave with Miss Amy. Friends? Ha ha ha, who needs that? This was Gustav's thought process as he walked towards their training room alongside Miss Amy. He stared at the blue cube in his hands with looks of greed visible all over his face. Gustav, what do you plan to do with such an amount of money? Miss Amy questioned. In the duel earlier, the wager was 50,000 rad would be given to Gustav by Masuba if he won, while if he lost, Masuba demanded that Gustav bowed to him whenever they crossed paths. Miss Amy wants some money maybe? Gustav said with a playful tone. You cheeky little brat, you're becoming arrogant after winning, eh? Miss Amy said and proceeded to knock Gustav's head. Ouch! Gustav held his head as he exclaimed in pain. It's all right if you don't want to say. Miss Amy added with a look of understanding. I plan to be independent, Gustav stated after a few seconds of silence. Chapter 34. It's all right if you don't want to say. Miss Amy added with a look of understanding. I plan to be independent, Gustav stated after a few seconds of silence. Miss Amy turned to the side to stare at him. Independence? She questioned. Yes, Miss Amy, I don't want to keep staying in a place where I'm not wanted, Gustav replied. Miss Amy had a contemplative look on her face after hearing Gustav's reply. So where do you plan on going? Miss Amy asked. I've made my research, and now that I won this duel I have enough money to rent an apartment, Gustav answered with a look of anticipation. That's not a bad idea since you're already of legal age, but it might also be a waste to rent an apartment right now, Miss Amy said as they came to a pause in front of their dojo. In this time and age, the legal age for humans, Slarkovs and mixed bloods, was 16 years. At 16 years a person would be considered to be an adult, and right now Gustav was already 17. What do you mean, Miss Amy? Gustav questioned with a confused look. In the next 4 months, the MBO entrance test will be holding. If you can pass and get picked to enter the MBO training camp, you won't require accommodation or feeding since the government will provide this for you, Miss Amy explained. She could understand where Gustav was coming from with his decision, but she felt it might be a waste for him to rent an apartment, only to leave it after 4 months. Rents were expensive around here and mostly only worked with annual payments. You should be saving up for other things instead, like supplies you may need during your days at the MBO camp. I can tell you that it won't be easy to survive there without having supplies that differ from military provisions, Miss Amy said with a slightly worried look. Miss Amy sounds sure of what she's saying. If that's the case, I will just have to receive more compensations, Gustav thought. Thank you, Miss Amy, but it would be better if I just move out now. About the issue of saving, I plan to do that by making even more money. Gustav bowed slightly to Miss Amy with a smile. Alright, just make sure you plan well enough because I can tell you that having only power might not be enough. Wealth is also an attribute, Miss Amy added before climbing up the 3 stairs positioned in front of their dojo. She suddenly paused and turned around to stare at Gustav. Since you won the challenge today, you and I will go on that date instead, Miss Amy stated and turned back around to walk in. Date? Gustav had a confused look on his face after hearing that. Come in and change back into your casual outfit, Miss Amy shouted from inside the dojo. Gustav was still confused by Miss Amy's sudden statement but still proceeded to walk into the dojo. 20 minutes later, Miss Amy and Gustav were sitting inside a large restaurant. A ton of food was placed on the table in front of them. Beef turkey, mutated gigantic prawns, fried tiger fish, black rice, fried crabs on a sticky, tea. The table was packed with exotic foods of different kinds. Gustav's eyes shone excitement, and he gulped down saliva while staring at the feast before them. Who knew Miss Amy was also a foodie? Gustav was surprised after Miss Amy ordered all these. They were currently in a well-known restaurant on the 634th floor of the building. Miss Amy decided to take Gustav out on a treat to reward him for his performance today. She reckoned that since she would have to go on a date with John Brown had Gustav lost, then she should give that reward to Gustav instead since he won. This was supposed to be a date, instead, it was more like a food treat. Gustav was the first to order when they arrived at the restaurant. Miss Amy had told him at that time not to be modest and order whatever he wished, but still, he decided not to order much. He was surprised when he saw the amount of food Miss Amy ordered. The entire table was stacked with different types of dishes right now. The people on other tables were staring at them with a weird look, but both of them were not bothered in the slightest. The restaurant was a lavish one. It was obvious from the internal designs. The tables and seats were so dark, shiny, and smooth that it could be mistaken for a mirror from the visible reflections on their surfaces. The entire floor was tiled with a type of technological building material that shone clouds. Walking on the floors made it look like you were walking on the clouds. The air smelled so yummy that you could taste it. What are you waiting for, an invitation? Miss Amy, who was currently holding onto a red prawn, called out to Gustav after noticing that he hadn't started eating. Dig in already, Miss Amy added before opening her mouth and stuffing a body part of the prawn into her mouth. Gustav smiled as he was only thinking about which dish to try out first. Let's go with the mutated prawns first, Gustav thought and proceeded to grab onto red prawn on the table. He could tell that the prawn was already dipped in hot sauce, which was why it was entirely red. There were about 5 of them on the table, and each one was thrice the size of a palm. Gustav broke one of them into 2 halves and quickly shoved it into his mouth. Half of it was still larger than a human palm, yet Gustav was able to put the entire thing in his mouth. His cheeks bloated up as he smiled in delight. It's delicious. Due to his mouth being full, he couldn't speak properly. Crunch! 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 As Gustav chewed on the mutated prawn, there was a mixture of flavors that he could detect. The salt at first crunch tasted a bit strong, but after that, he could detect spices mixed in. A bit peppery with a tone of chicken-like flavor, mixed with small juicy tastes like cranberry and flowery lavender-like taste. Sea smell was also present, giving off an amazing feel. Everything came together to create a pleasant kind of taste in his mouth that was both sharp and mild. Gustav wasted no time in grabbing the second half before downing it in one go. Gustav's hands and mouth didn't stop moving until there was nothing left on the table. In a few minutes, everything had been downed by him and Miss Amy. Gustav rested his back on the chair after the feast and sighed in relief. Ah, it seems I'm going to be pregnant for a while, Gustav thought while staring at his tummy that was bloated. He looked up to stare at Miss Amy, who also had a look of satisfaction. Gustav stared at Miss Amy's tummy region and was shocked. Where did all that food go? He could see that there wasn't a bump. Not even the slightest sign could be seen that she just had a huge feast. He calculated in his mind that Miss Amy ate at least 60% of the food on the table. Who knew Miss Amy was such a monster? Seeing the way her tummy was as flat as ever, he couldn't imagine having a food competition with Miss Amy. By the way, Gustav, why didn't you accept Masuba's friendship? Miss Amy decided to ask this as it had been bugging her for a while. Gustav sat up upon hearing that and stared at nothing for a few seconds before answering. Miss Amy, at this point in my life, I have decided not to accept friendships that will be nothing but fake. That Masuba was one of them who called me trash, but after beating his ass, he decided to make friends. I would never be able to trust people like that to have my back when I'm in a vulnerable state. What happens if one day I'm unable to use my strength or become trash again? Would someone like that remain my friend? If power is the only reason for the bond we share, then there might as well not be any bond in the first place. Since the friendship is gonna be based on power, then it's fake and I don't want it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to ever establish real bonds with people, but I will try to, and when I do, it won't be based on power or selfish interests. Gustav explained lengthily. Miss Amy stared at him for a few seconds before replying. I understand your point, but it's also idiotic to think that way, Gustav was surprised by Miss Amy's response. If she understands, then why does she still say it's idiotic? Gustav wondered. It's idiotic because you might not know when you need to use such people for specific purposes, Miss Amy stated. Chapter 35. Gustav was still staring at her with a dumbfounded look. I'm not asking you to be friends with them. You can just be some sort of accomplice or acquaintance to them and use them when you find yourself in a sticky situation that power might not be able to solve. Sometimes connections are useful, remember this, Miss Amy said and proceeded to stand up. We're leaving? Gustav questioned after noticing Miss Amy's action. Do you want to order another round? Miss Amy questioned. I know I'm all right, Gustav replied as he stared at his tummy before proceeding to stand up. After Miss Amy settled the bill and they left the restaurant and afterwards the large building, Miss Amy dropped Gustav at home with her hover bike. The eventful day ended this way. Gustav woke up the next morning and opened the system interface. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop. He wasted no time before calling out host attributes. Host attributes: name Gustav Oslov, level 4, class EXP 260/9500 HP, 170/170 energy, 80/80. Attributes: strength 32 perception, 30 mental fortitude, 28 agility, 28 speed, 30 bravery, 28 intelligence, 31 charm. Null attributes point 36. Ever since when Gustav raised mental fortitude to be almost as high as the others, had been saving up attribute points for emergencies. Every week, he would only add 4 to each of the attributes while saving the rest. His other reason for saving up attributes points was so that when he unlocked Charm, he would be able to raise it to reach the points of other attributes. Gustav didn't check the system interface the day before when he became a Zulu ranked. Now that he was checking it, he noticed that the stats for his strength didn't go up even though he had undergone a tremendous increase in strength. Does the system only record the stats it gives to me? It seems this is the case, Gustav pondered internally. If the system was to record the stats based on his increase in strength, it should be double what was there right now. I wonder what requirements I need to unlock Charm. Gustav was starting to get worried after not being able to unlock Charm for 2 months. He was thinking about the requirement. A part of him felt he would maybe have to pull a big one with a large audience. Another part of him felt maybe he would need to get a girlfriend or something. He knew the latter part was stupid thinking, but this has been bugging him for a while. He remembered when Bravery was unlocked. It was also in front of a large audience, but Charm wasn't unlocked along with it, so he was pretty confused. But he felt to unlock Charm, the requirement might be something that won't let him remain low-key. Gustav had a slight headache thinking about it. Maybe you'll just ask Miss Amy what her definition of charm is, Gustav concluded internally and proceeded to open abilities. Skills and abilities. Level 3 Sprint, Level 2 Regeneration, Level 2 Morph, Level 2 Joint Movement, Level 2 Toxin Immunity, Level 2 Recreation, Level 2 Bloodline Acquisition, Level 2 Chopping, Level 5 Palm Strike, Level 3 Frying, Level 7 Gustav had a wry smile whenever he saw the cooking skills underneath. The most shameful aspect was, the cooking skills had higher levels than his fighting skills. Maybe I should just take Boss Danzo's offer and become his successor, Gustav said with a sigh. He had been going to the kitchen more often than using his fighting abilities, which was what caused the growth of his cooking skills to increase. The good side to it was when he found out that he could use some of the cooking skills in an actual fight. He tried using Chop one time when he and Miss Amy were sparring, and it worked as a perfect counter to her attack at that moment. What Gustav felt he was lacking now was experience, and he was still trying to figure out how to garner more experience before the start MBO entrance test. He wanted to increase the level of bloodline acquisition so he would be able to steal higher graded bloodlines, but it felt he might have to steal a lot of lower grade bloodlines before he would be able to level up to that extent, because he had realized that leveling up came with more usage of a specific skill or ability. Gustav stood up from his tub and went to prepare for school. In a few minutes he was done. I have to look for an apartment today, Gustav muttered as he walked out of the house quietly. Gustav arrived at school in a few minutes of running and went to the school kitchen as usual. The way he worked now was 3 hours in the school kitchen before heading towards class for the day's activities. Even though he only needed to work 3 hours, he was still getting 5,000 rad every month. At this point, what no one knew was Gustav had over 250,000 rad. Although this wasn't a huge sum in the eyes of millionaires and the likes, Gustav was still considered pretty rich. He still remembered that his father earned around 20,000 every month from energy mining, while his mother earned around 15,000 from being a sub-assistant lab scientist. So he could be considered pretty rich even though he received the money from rich brats. The day pretty much ended uneventfully. It hadn't been revealed yet that Gustav was already a Zulu-ranked mixed blood. If not, it would have caused a huge uproar. It was well known that it is very hard for an F-grade mixed bloods, found it hard to reach the Zulu rank since that was the lowest grade for bloodlines. The grade of a bloodline determined how far a mixed blood would reach in the bloodline ranking. Everyone had seen Gustav as a mixed blood who would never get to the Zulu rank due to his bloodline grade being lower than F. Gustav left the school premises after closing hours. He was currently headed towards the northeast part of Plankton City. Miss Amy had given him today off for training since he decided to go look for an apartment to stay. He was currently heading towards the edge of the city there since that was the cheapest place to rent a house according to his research. Gustav had enough money to use public transport, but he was still contemplating whether he should or not. After all, he was already used to trekking. After a brief moment of thinking, he decided to make use of public transport. He boarded a hover bus at the nearest park. The hover buses around here, just like the others, floated few inches above the ground, and the movement was very smooth. No bumpiness of any kind. Also, there were spatial rings positioned in different parts of the roads. This was only for vehicles to get to their destinations faster. A spatial ring was big enough to fit in 10 huge trucks at the same time, and it was always active on the roads. It was able to teleport bigger masses and farther than the teleportation circle for pedestrians. The only issue was, a person couldn't enter the spatial ring. If a normal person tried entering the spatial ring, their bodies would be ripped to shreds before they could arrive on the other side, which was why the teleportation circle was for individuals. The hover bus began its movement, and it only took about 5 minutes before it arrived at Gustav's destination. Gustav didn't even have enough time to enjoy the inside scenery of the bus or the sight of the beautiful female students sitting beside him. He never expected the journey to be this short. Immediately Gustav got down. What appeared in his line of sight were small buildings of 30 stories and the likes. Unlike the main part of the city, this place was more like a town. Gustav walked towards a particular building on his right, which happened to be a coffee shop. He walked into the small coffee shop and arrived in front of a small table at the window's side. A man in a green business suit was sitting there waiting for him. "Good day," Gustav greeted him. "Good day, can I help you?" the man asked politely. "I'm supposed to meet a certain Mr. Kalu here," Gustav replied. "That's me, and you are?" the man replied and also asked again. "Gustav," Gustav replied with his name. "Oh, Mr. Gustav, nice to meet you." The man stood up and reached out his hand to shake Gustav. Gustav returned the handshake with a slightly surprised expression. I had expected he would freak out upon finding out that it was a kid, Gustav thought, and proceeded to sit in front after the exchange of pleasantries. This man happened to be an agent Gustav contacted earlier on through Miss Amy. He was the one who would help Gustav get an apartment around here. Gustav had expected some kind of attitude when the agent met him, but he was surprised to meet such a polite person who didn't even flinch after finding out that he was meeting up with a kid. The both of them started discussions on the kind of apartment Gustav would like to rent. After Gustav mentioned his preferences, Mr. Kalu brought out a device that projected the looks of different apartments. Gustav only needed to touch the projection to zoom in on a particular apartment. After checking through several of them, Gustav finally made a choice. "I think I'd like this one," Gustav said while pointing at the apartment displayed on the projection. Chapter 36. After Gustav picked an apartment, the agent, Mr. Kalu, took Gustav to where it was located. It was only a few blocks away. This was the edge of the city, so Gustav could see the outline of a sparse forest behind this residential area, with a well-structured road in the middle that led to the city borders. They arrived in front of a 7-story building situated in the middle of the 3rd Street. It was yellow and brown in color. It was well-structured and didn't seem too fancy, either did it look poor. Although this area was very far from Echelon Academy, transportation made the long distance seem useless. Gustav would be able to get to school within 5 minutes after walking to the hover bus station. Mr. Kalu took Gustav to the 3rd apartment on the last floor. Each floor had about 7 apartments, but the last floor had only 4. This was because there was a big balcony up there that covered 1/3 of space. The apartment Gustav was about to rent was just beside the door that led to the balcony. The agent took him into the apartment and showed him how every room looked. The apartment had 2 rooms, with a kitchen and a living room that was big enough to house up to 50 people. It was really well spaced. Gustav walked from room to room, inspecting everywhere with a satisfied expression. Even though there was 1 extra room than he expected, he still wanted to go ahead and rent the place after finding out the price. 50,000 rad? Gustav asked Mr. Kalu. Yes, Mr. Gustav. Is something wrong? We can bargain for it if you feel it's too expensive, Mr. Kalu proposed. Oh, so the price can still go lower than this? Gustav was pleasantly surprised, as he had been expecting it to be expensive than this. Well, how about I pay 40,000? Gustav decided to try out his luck. Mr. Gustav, 40 is a bit lower than the bargain range. Can we get it up to 45,000? Mr. Kalu asked with a wry smile hung on his face. Gustav still wanted to bargain a little bit more, but he remembered that Mr. Kalu had been nice to him since the start, and also at this time he had enough money to spare, so he decided not to drag it any further. All right, then 45,000 it is, Gustav agreed with a smile. The transaction was done in cash since Gustav didn't have a bank account. Mr. Kalu was shocked that at Gustav's age he didn't have a bank account, but he was lenient enough to accept the payment in cash. This made Gustav add another activity to his to-do list, opening a bank account. Documents were signed and they still had to visit a government agency around that area for proper documentation and access before everything was done. Around 5 p.m. they were done with the process, and Gustav was given the key to the apartment. Mr. Kalu left after a brief talk with Gustav about some other rules of staying in the vicinity. Gustav stood in the empty apartment with a smile on his face. Now I can finally haul. Before he could complete his words, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Host has completed the goal. Achieved total independence. Another goal achieved, and this time it says total independence? Gustav stared at the notification with a surprised look. Looks like renting an apartment was the last criteria for achieving this goal. Gustav held his chin in contemplation. Goal rewards, new skill unlocked, silent advancement, 5,000 EXP. Gustav stared at the rewards with a contemplative expression. Silent advancement. Sounds like a movement-related skill. Gustav had a slightly disappointed look because he already had dash and sprint. He was expecting something that didn't have to do with movement. They'll need to test this later, Gustav muttered and proceeded to open host attributes on the system interface. Host attributes: name Gustav Oslov, level 4, class EXP 5260/9500 HP 170/170 energy 80/80. Attributes: strength 32 perception 30 mental fortitude 28 agility 28 speed 30 bravery 28 intelligence 31 charm. Null. Attributes .36. Gustav nodded after seeing his EXP increase. Around 4,000 more to go, he muttered softly. The rate at which I'm getting EXP is really slow. Apart from the daily tasks that give me up to 50, the weekly and monthly quests I completed, and the goals, there should be another way to get more EXP. Gustav pondered. He remembered when he was making more research about Earth's old days video games, monsters would have to be killed to get EXP, but this wasn't a game. This was real life, and he had no idea where he would come across monsters that he could defeat to gain EXP. He looked at his level again. Only moving up 3 levels in 2 months is not a good pace. My stats are pretty much progressing well, but my increase in levels not so much. I'm like what those old gamers would call a noob. I need to find a way to farm more EXP, if not it will take a long time for me to unlock shop function, and that class thingy. I'm sure that also has to do with levels. Gustav closed the system interface after a long contemplation on solutions. He stared at the empty apartment. Time to go shopping for home materials. Gustav smiled and headed out. He was still new to this area, so when he got outside the building he had to ask around for the closest stores. He walked past 3 streets before arriving at a place where several stores could be on the right and left sides. This place was like a local trading area. Gustav looked around before finding a store that dealer with installments and home appliances. Gustav walked into the store, which didn't have a lot of customers at the moment. There were rows of gadgets and appliances beautifully arranged within the small store. Gustav could see projector bulbs that were a modern replacement for television sets. There was the web board, which was a modern replacement for computers. The entire store was packed with different kinds of gadgets and home appliances. Gustav wasted no time in selecting the ones he wanted. At first, the store owner wanted to send him out when he noticed there was a student in school uniform parading around his store and picking different things, but when Gustav brought out a wad of cash, the store owner swallowed saliva and became very polite. He personally showed Gustav around the store, helping him to pick up his desired appliance. Seeing the way money made the store owner become humble, Gustav decided to use him more to his satisfaction. Gustav told the man he wouldn't be able to get everything he bought down to his apartment because they were too heavy for him, and he also needed to buy more things in the other store beside them. At first, the store owner wanted to say Gustav had to find a way by himself, but Gustav threatened to go to another store to get what he needed if the store owner decided not to assist him. Seeing that he was going to lose quite a sum if Gustav decided to go elsewhere, the store owner had no choice but to help. He first called 2 of his male workers to help, but it still wasn't enough, so even he had to assist. They left the store and headed for Gustav's apartment. Each person was carrying about 3 cartons where the goods were kept. They nearly cursed out loud when they found out that Gustav was staying on the 7th floor of a building without an elevator. They would have to carry the goods that high. Normally Gustav would be able to use the storage device to keep these goods, but he wanted to punish the store owner for almost sending him out earlier. Somehow the store owner turned out to be a chubby man with a pregnant woman kind of stomach. "I'm only helping you exercise." Gustav erased any form of guilt he felt after staring at the store owner, who was currently sweating buckets. Several minutes later they arrived at the top floor and took Gustav's purchases to his apartment. After this, Gustav headed to another store to get other things like cushions, mattresses, wooden structures like reading tables and shelves etc. Unlike before, Gustav carried all these things back to his new apartment by himself. He was using this to complete the daily task. While he was moving to and fro, people in the neighborhood had been staring at him an intriguing look. His face was unknown around here, so it was pretty much expected. He finally brought the last equipment he needed and was headed towards his apartment with a large box in his hand. He got to the front of the building and was about to head towards the stairs when someone called out to him from the side. "Hello, are you the new person who stays in apartment 48? It was a soft feminine voice. Gustav turned to the right to stare at who had just spoken. Chapter 37. "Hello, are you the new person who stays in apartment 48? It was a soft feminine voice. Gustav turned to the right to stare at the person who had just spoken. It was a teenage girl in a blue sweatshirt and green tight-fitted shorts. She looked athletic with her slim figure. Her hair was a touch of silver and pink, giving her a tender look with a soft smile on her face. Another thing that made her stand out was the 2 small horns protruding out of the sides of her forehead. The horns were about 3 centimeters in length, but they had a spiraling kind of look like that of a unicorn. She was coming towards Gustav from the alleyway. "Yes, can I help you?" Gustav questioned after analyzing the girl in an instant. "No, on the contrary, can I help you with that?" The teenage girl pointed at the box in Gustav's hand while speaking. "No thanks, I'm all right," Gustav replied while turning around to head towards the stairs. The girl was surprised at Gustav's uninterested and aloof look. Gustav started climbing the stairs. Surprisingly, the girl followed him. "Hold on, I also live here. We're going to be neighbors, so let me at least assist you," she called out to Gustav from behind. "No assistance needed," Gustav replied without looking back. The girl, who was obviously a stubborn type, ran to Gustav's front and turned to face him while climbing the stairs in a backward motion. "I'm Angie, nice to meet you. I also stay on the last floor," the girl said with a cute smile hung on her face. "Nice to meet you also, Angie," Gustav replied while turning towards the left and climbing up the stairs faster. He passed by Angie's side as he ascended. "Hold on, what about you? What's your name?" Angie questioned Gustav, who had already climbed past her. Gustav froze for an instant before he continued climbing upwards again. "Gustav." The tone of his voice was low but audible. "Gustav? Nice name." Angie giggled lightly and ran up the stairs to stand before Gustav again. "Come on, let me assist you with that," Angie proposed again. "No assistance needed," Gustav said again before turning towards the left and climbing upwards to pass by her side. "Tom! Tom! Tom! Tom!" She ran up the stairs again and blocked Gustav. "Come on, we're going to be neighbors, we have to be nice to one another," she said while trying to grab the box from Gustav. "No need," Gustav stated as he moved to the box to the side, dodging her hand. "Come on." she said again while reaching out to grab the box. No need! Gustav dodged her arm again. Come on, no need! Come on, no need! Let me help you, your help is unnecessary. Gustav was starting to get annoyed with Angie trying to help by all means. She pushed herself forward again to grab the box, and this time Gustav moved out of the way completely. Angie exclaimed as her feet tripped on a small metal that protruded out of the stairway. Before she knew what was happening, she had lost her balance, and her body was falling forward. Since they started exchanging words, they had already climbed to the 3rd floor, so falling at this point would make her roll down 50 steps and sustain injuries. Gustav had already calculated this in his mind as he processed her fall. He felt that she was annoying and maybe he should just leave her so she would learn to mind her business, but he remembered she was just trying to help him after all. Gustav shifted the box to his left side with speed, placing it beneath his armpit, while holding on to the bottom with his left arm. He quickly turned around and stretched out his right arm. Angie, who was currently falling towards the stairs with her eyes closed due to fear, suddenly felt an arm wrap around her tummy region, preventing her from falling. She exclaimed in surprise while opening her eyes to see her body a few feet away from colliding with the stairs. She turned her face to the side and stared at the owner of the arm, which happened to be Gustav. Watch where you're going, Gustav said in a low tone while pulling her up. At this moment, Angie felt a wave of embarrassment welling up from within. Her cheeks became flushed as she stared at Gustav, who turned around and started climbing up the stairs again. She stood there staring at his back for several seconds before climbing up quickly to go meet him. Tom! 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 Gustav was climbing the stairs at a moderate speed, so she was able to catch up to him easily. She shyly turned her face to the left to glance at Gustav, who kept climbing up the stairs with an aloof expression. Thank you, she spoke with a low tone before turning her face towards the side. No problem, Gustav replied. She noticed that Gustav was no longer carrying the box in 2 hands, instead, it was on his left side. Looks like he truly didn't need any help, she said internally with a surprised expression. At first glance, everyone would take Gustav as the typical weak-looking guy, even though he was already growing bigger and bigger each day. Seeing the big box in his hand, she had thought it wouldn't be easy for him to lift it to the top, so she decided to come help. Are you a mixed blood also? She asked with a curious look. Also? Gustav replied with a question. I'm a mixed blood, but you didn't look like one, so I thought you were a normal human, she explained as they climbed up the stairs. Are looks a criteria for being a mixed blood? Gustav questioned with a slightly dissatisfied expression. No, that wasn't what I meant. It's just that I've always wanted to help the weak with my strength as a mixed blood, and I noticed you. Sorry if I have upset you. She noticed that as she spoke more and more, Gustav's face was turning sour, so she decided to stop and apologize. It's all right, Gustav replied. Her explanation was reminding him of his old self, which was why he had a sour expression earlier. The world doesn't deserve any heroes. Just try to survive first, because without enough power your life is not really in your hands. This was Gustav's thought process after remembering the situation with Hung Jo and the rest. His death would have been swept under the rug had they killed him there due to their powerful backgrounds, but him killing Paul and causing Hung Ja's current state stirred up a lot within the city. He would probably have been caught and killed if not for Miss Amy, which was why his current thought process was to climb to the pinnacle of power on this planet so no one would ever be able to control his fate or life again. I saw you on the bus earlier. You attend Echelon Academy, don't you? Angie broke the silence after a while. H&M. Gustav nodded in affirmation, but was wondering why she would ask the question that had such an obvious answer since he was currently still in school uniform. That's great, I attend Black Rock schools, Angie said with a smile. Gustav remembered Black Rock schools since it wasn't too far from Echelon Academy. Just like Echelon Academy, Black Rock schools also had mixed bloods, Slarkovs and humans mixed within. The difference was Echelon Academy had more prestige. As they continued to ascend the stairs together, Angie spoke about her school, her plans for the future, her parents and sibling. Gustav listened to her talks and inputted a few words till he arrived in front of his apartment. Angie was still speaking, but he had to cut her off, saying he still had to arrange his apartment. Angie nodded and waved him goodbye with a smile before heading towards the apartment opposite Gustav's. Gustav had the urge to face Spam after noticing that she was staying with her family right in front of him. It's going to get noisy around here, Gustav sighed as he walked into his apartment. Gustav started to unpack and arrange everything within the boxes. He put everything in the appropriate place. The mattress, the wall projection screen, reading table etc. He used Sprint twice to make his work faster, and in 30 minutes he was done. He stared at the apartment with a smile. On the walls of the living room was a projection of the seas that glowed. It gave off a calming feeling. The black and red leather cushions in the middle of the room. A reading table, placed on the northwest corner of the living room with a circular glass-like web board placed on it. A shelf was placed at the south corner of the room. Gustav was satisfied to see everything structured the way he wanted. His face suddenly shone a frown. I still need to go pick them up. I can't leave them there. They belong to me after all. Gustav sighed as he spoke. He remembered leaving some of the clothes he had gotten during this period. He put them in the small closet inside his former room in his parents' house. He didn't want to go back there again initially, but now he had to. There were just some clothes and he could easily buy them back, but he didn't want to leave any trace of himself in that house. Gustav walked out of his newly rented apartment and went downstairs. At this time it was already past 7 p.m. Chapter 38. Gustav headed to the nearest bus station and traveled back to his parents' house. As expected, it only took about 5 minutes before he got to the stop closest to his parents' home. Gustav walked through the 34th Street headed for the residential area. In a few minutes, he arrived at a house that was 7th on the lineup of houses in this area. The difference between this street and the new one his apartment was located in was, this place was constructed better even though only bungalow-type houses could be seen. It was obvious that this part of the city was more on the urban side. Gustav wasted no time, walking towards the house. He looked at the surroundings and noticed that his mother's car wasn't parked in front, which meant she wasn't home yet. Gustav, who knew where the key was placed, went to get it. He opened the doors and went in straight to the room he spent 10 years holed up in. He wasted no time picking up his clothes from the closet placed behind his tub. He brought out a storage device that was a bit similar to the one he took from Hung Jo. A button type. He had gotten rid of Hung Ja's storage device a long time ago. He didn't want anyone tracing it to him. Gustav put the clothes into the storage device after activating it. He turned around to leave the room but paused when he got to the door. He turned back around and observed the room. He walked back towards the tub he had been sleeping in for years and placed his hand on it. He rubbed the edge slightly. I won't miss you. He turned around after muttering those words and walked out of the room. Gustav walked through the small passageway and was headed towards the door when he sensed something. Calm. He could hear the sounds of footsteps coming from outside. Looks like they've arrived, Gustav muttered as the door was pushed open. 2 people walked in. They were none other than Gustav's mother and his junior brother, Hendrik. They stared at Gustav, who was just coming from the passageway on the other end, for a moment before heading towards the couch to sit. They ignored Gustav, who kept walking towards the door. This trash! You know your brother hasn't been coming back home on time, and you never even showed any concern. Gustav's mother shouted out with a twisted look. Mother, why do you bother initiating a conversation with him? Hendrik crossed his legs with swag as he spoke in a cool voice. Gustav had paused his steps after hearing them speak. The trash has to be useful for something at least. Let him show concern. Gustav's mother voiced out once again. Hey, useless, my only son has received a scholarship to attend MBO Academy for young mixed bloods and is now getting personal training from an Echo-ranked mixed blood. Gustav's mother added with a prideful glare. Oh, is that why they've been coming late all this time? Gustav put 2 and 2 together. You should come and congratulate him. Be good for one thing, even though we all know you're useless. Gustav's mom kept flapping her gums without stop as she praised Hendrik. Gustav was standing a few feet away from them. He stood there for several seconds with a dark look on his face before finally saying something. Good for him. Gustav resumed walking towards the door. He passed behind where they were seated on the couch. A smile hung on his face as he spoke again. Congratulations. The look on Gustav's face when he congratulated Hendrik was that of unconcern. The smile had a kind of ridiculing element in it. Step. 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 Gustav resumed walking forward after saying that. Hey, you should be on your knees when telling me that, Hendrik stated with a disgusted expression. He felt disgusted by the fact that Gustav didn't have the same jealous look he used to whenever he stared at him. That look of reverence was no longer there. Gustav didn't stop walking. He behaved like he didn't hear a word of what Hendrik just demanded. Hey, trash, did you hear me? Kneel and congratulate me. Hendrik looked pissed as he stood up to stare at Gustav, who was still headed towards the door. Make me. Gustav muttered silently as he turned his head around to stare at Hendrik. Gaze. Hendrik flinched back a little, seeing the cold look on Gustav's face. He never thought a day would come when Gustav would stare at him like that. The gaze made a chill run down his spine. Why does he look so fierce all of a sudden? Hendrik couldn't wrap his head around the sudden change. Gustav turned back to face the door as he arrived before it, and stretched out his hand to open it. All of a sudden a strange force descended upon Gustav, causing him to pause in his movements. I said kneel! Hendrik shouted out again. He seemed to have regained his spine. He was cursing himself internally for getting scared of Gustav. How can I be afraid of trash? Hendrik's right hand was outstretched towards Gustav's direction. Gustav felt the same strange force wrapping around his shoulders and forcibly pushing him downwards. He recognized this power. It was Hendrik's. Gustav's knees bent slightly due to the sudden force, but in a second he straightened himself back up, using his shoulders to push the invisible force upwards. Hendrik was surprised to see that Gustav wasn't falling to his knees as he had expected. What is happening? Isn't Hendrik using his powers now? How is Gustav still standing? Their mother could see Hendrik stretching out his hand, which meant he was using his powers, but she didn't understand why she was still seeing the same casual look on Gustav's face like he was unaffected. How is he able to resist my telekinesis? Hendrik started walking towards Gustav as he increased the output of his telekinesis. Gustav felt the force pressing onto his shoulder increase. The floor below was starting to creak due to the increase in weight. This should be around 1,000 kilograms of force. Gustav calculated as he turned around and started walking towards Hendrik. If this was Gustav's old self, that amount of force bearing down on his shoulders would crush him. Step! 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 With every step Gustav took, the shock on Hendrik's and their mother's faces increased. How? Hendrik channeled his bloodline even more, increasing the force beyond what it was earlier. Gustav paused for an instant while looking down as his face turned dark. He raised his right foot and placed it in front of his left before doing the same for his left. I have tolerated your excesses as my little brother for a long time. Gustav spoke with an aggrieved tone. Left you to do as you please with me since I was unable to fight back. I was a pathetic big brother, wasn't I? Well, that ends today, he voiced out as he arrived in front of Hendrik, who still had his arm outstretched. As your senior brother, I shall give you what you rightfully deserve when you disrespect an older person, Gustav added as he stared at Hendrik in the eyes. Hendrik had his widened from shock, but before he could open his mouth to speak he noticed Gustav's palm swinging towards his left cheek. It was way too fast for him to follow, and before he could react to the speed, contact was made. Pa! A loud slap resounded in the sitting room as Hendrik was sent flying towards the far end of the living room. Bang! His back slammed into the wall on the other end as his mouth hung open with his back arched in. His body stayed in that position for a while as his face showed pain and confusion before his body slid towards the floor. Since you want these useless parents so bad, you can have them for yourself, Gustav voiced out as he turned around. His mother was still seated on the sofa with her mouth wide open. It was as if a movie was playing out before her. He is able to resist Endrick's telekinesis? Where did he get the strength to perform such feats? Her mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. She felt she had seen the most unbelievable thing just happen in front of her. How is this possible? Isn't this the same trash I gave birth to? She couldn't react properly to the incident, and she kept staring at Gustav, wondering if he was another person in disguise. Gustav started walking towards the door once again. As from today onwards, we are not family. If ever cross paths in the future, I will treat you people as I treat everyone else, Gustav said as he got to the door. We share no tie or relationship, and it will remain that way. Chapter 39. Endrick knelt on the floor with an expression of pain written all over his face. His vision was blurry, and he could smell a metallic liquid running down his nostrils as he stared at the back of a person getting further and further away in his line of sight. How w chiri did he gt such insane stringth froem. Endrick felt drowsy from receiving a slap from Gustav. He could see about 3 Gustavs walking towards the door while issuing a warning that he couldn't hear properly due to the ringing in his left ear caused by the stinging slap. Gustav opened the door, walked out after voicing out his earlier words. His mother was still seated for many seconds before she remembered that her beloved son was still laying on the floor at the other end of the living room. She quickly stood up and ran to Endrick. She had tears in her eyes as she saw Endrick kneeling on the floor with blood oozing out of his nose and his left eye swollen. Oh, Endrick, are you? She squatted and tried helping him up, but Endrick pushed her away and forcibly stood up. Don't touch me! He had a look of humiliation on his face as he walked towards his room. Their mother, who fell on her but after Endrick pushed her away, gritted her teeth with a crazed expression. She couldn't wrap her head around what just happened even after some time had passed. That trash dares to touch my precious boy, she muttered with a look of craziness. In a few minutes, Gustav had gotten back to his newly rented apartment. He stood inside his apartment with a smile on his face. He didn't feel choked or uncomfortable in this new environment in any way. When he was staying with his parents, he was always in the room he was given, but even with that, the environment was choking. Even when he hardly saw the family he stayed with, and yet the environment was still very inconvenient for him. But now, that was no longer the case. He felt he would finally be able to create nice memories in a place he could truly call home. Gustav walked into his room and changed into pajamas after placing his clothes in his new closet. He calculated his expenses for the day, and noted that he had around 150,000 rad left. It was an amount that could last him an entire year, but after listening to Miss Amy's speech in the dojo the other day, Gustav had decided to accumulate wealth before joining the MBO since it might be needed. The only problem was how to go about it. The goal he had in mind for the week now was to make extensive research on the best way to use his abilities to make some cash. He could do things his parents couldn't do since both of them never surpassed the Zulu rank, and he believed that with his current strength he should be among the strongest Zulu ranked in the city right now. It was getting late, but Gustav wasn't in the mood to sleep yet. He walked towards the living room and went to his reading table. Gustav sat on the chair placed in front and tapped twice on the glass-like circular board. Troyan! A holographic projection of a keyboard and a virtual screen appeared above the glass-like board. This was a modern-age computer. It could be taken anywhere since it was very portable. It could also decrease to a pocket size. Gustav had only made use of one in the school, so he wasn't as experienced as others in using the web, but he had decided to learn. Connect to nearest hotspot. Yes. Gustav muttered out these words before tapping his index finger on the yes button that appeared in the air. 3 days later, Gustav was starting to get used to living in this new environment. He had been heading to school with Angie for the past 3 days. He had met Angie's parents, and they were the nice type, just as he expected since their daughter was the same. Her father was a pure Slarkov. Angie got her horns from him, while her mother was a pure human. It was hard to find pure humans and Slarkovs these days, so Gustav was surprised. Eng's parents also happened to work in a laboratory close to the heart of Plankton City. She had a junior brother who was around the same age as Endrick. Surprisingly, he had the opposite of Endrick's character, and was even a shy type. Gustav had met some other neighbors during this time. Most were pretty neutral with their attitude towards him. This made Gustav feel like he was in a different world entirely. Does this mean that poor people are the nicest? If that's the case, why are my parents the opposite? Gustav could never wrap his head around this, and sometimes when he thought about it he would develop a headache, so he just decided to stop thinking about how the world works and focus on his own. Gustav had continued his training with Miss Amy in Gami Dojo. Gustav's feet had already traveled across the 3 floors of the dojo. Whenever he bumped into any one of his age mates practicing there, they would have a look of reverence. More of them had approached him to be his friend, but Gustav still accepted no friendships. Internally he felt this situation wasn't good. No one was coming to look for his trouble. How was he going to receive future compensations? But Gustav also knew that it was only a matter of time before that happened, because he had noticed that some of them still had looks of dissatisfaction when they saw him. He knew it was only a matter of time before one of those proud kids would come to challenge him again, and Gustav had sworn in his heart that this time, he would receive a larger compensation than he collected from Asuba. Gustav had been researching for jobs he could do to amass more money for the past few days, and he had found several on the internet. The only problem was, most of them were full-time works, and it was impossible for him to drop out of school right now. It was 8 p.m. right now. Gustav laid on his bed like a log of wood and sighed. Only the virtual reality combat looks plausible, but it would take a long time for me to build enough reputation for others to pay for a challenge, Gustav muttered. He truly felt he might remain a poor bastard and not get enough money before the MBO entrance test took place. At this time only a bit over 3 months were left. Gustav sighed again. Such short timing, I should have started this earlier, he lamented. While Gustav was still thinking of ways out, he suddenly felt the hair on his skin rise. What's th? Before he could complete his statement, a loud sound was heard. Bang! It sounded like a collapsing building. Kairar! A loud, heart-wrenching scream rang out across the building, causing Gustav to immediately jump up from his bed. Swuv! Gustav immediately ran out of his room and straight outside his apartment. Chatter! Chatter! He wasn't the only one who heard the noise. The neighbors also heard. Several of them could be seen moving towards the source of the noise. Kaiar! Another scream rang out again, causing the hair on Gustav's skin to rise again. What in the world is that? He wondered internally as he ran towards the stairs. Due to the number of people on the small space stairs, the movement was slow. He could see Eng climbing down at a fast pace from his location. There were about 6 to 7 people before him and her. Gustav turned back around and ran into the passageway. In a few seconds he arrived at the door that led to the balcony. He wasted no time in pushing it open. Gustav walked in at a fast pace and moved toward the edge of the balcony, which was 20 feet away. He stood before the edge and looked down at the ground from this height. He could sense that the disturbance was coming from the ground floor because he could see people moving towards the apartment there. Gustav breathed in before jumping several feet forward. Chapter 40. He stood before the edge and looked down at the ground from this height. He could sense that the disturbance was coming from the ground floor because he could see people moving towards the apartment there. The height of this building was over 30 meters compared to the building where he fought Paul. This one was like a dwarf. Gustav breathed in before jumping several feet forward. Whoosh! As he descended, the wind blew into his sweater, causing it to inflate. His blonde hair was also afloat due to the wind. Gustav felt like he was flying, and the freedom of falling through the air was out of this world, but it didn't last. Bam! Gustav landed on his feet with his knees slightly bent. The ground slightly quaked as his feet made contact with it, causing a small cloud of dust to form. The loud sound he made upon landing alerted everyone, and they turned to stare at him with awe. Gustav was surprised since he didn't feel the recoil like he was supposed to, but right now he didn't take time to analyze that since the situation at hand took priority. Gustav turned around to face the building that housed his apartment. There was a huge hole on the wall in front. The insides of the apartment that happened to be situated here could be seen even though it was a bit dark. Since Gustav practically used a shortcut to get here, he was among the first people to arrive, which meant no one had gone in to check what was happening. 4 men were also approaching from behind. Gustav stared at the hole in the wall with a look of bewilderment. His perception was able to spread out more than 20 meters around him, so he could sense something moving within the apartment. That's not human. As Gustav perceived this, a man from behind ran past Gustav towards the hole. The man was only a few feet away from getting to the hole when he suddenly felt a pull from behind. He turned around to see a teenage boy with blonde hair holding onto his right arm. Before he could even react, he was lifted and pulled back with force. Gustav was the one who pulled the man back, which dumbfounded a lot of people around, but before they could say anything, bang! The hole in the wall blasted open wider than before. Debris was sent flying in all directions. Had Gustav not pulled the man back, some of the debris would have made contact with him. But right now everyone's eyes were focused on what came out of the hole. And what came out of it was something Gustav had never come across before since the time of his birth. Tom! 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 The sound of the heavy footsteps resounded in everyone's ear, while the visuals of what came out of the hole gave them a huge fright. It was a 5-meter-tall creature with brown furs all over its body and dark red eyes. It stood like a human on 2 legs that were bent backward. 4 sharp claws dripping with blood could be seen on both its paws, and its body had a kind of robust physique. Its facial look was similar to a wolf, while its body was a bit similar to a bear's due to its robustness. Thud! An arm that had been uprooted from a shoulder dropped from the mouth of the creature. It was dripping with fresh blood. Kairar! Blood wolf mixed breed. Someone, call the cops! The entire place became chaotic immediately after the source of the disturbance was revealed. People started running from place to place in fear. So this is how a mixed breed looks? Gustav had only read about them, but he had never seen how they looked. It didn't cross his mind to check it out on the web since he had been busy trying to find a job in the last 3 days. The mixed breed glared at people in the vicinity and started walking forward. About 20 people had gathered around here, but none of them were mixed bloods. They were mostly normal humans. Gustav and the mixed breed exchanged glances. Grhhh! The mixed breed growled with a fierce look as blood dripped from its fangs that were about 9 inches long. The men behind Gustav had looks of wariness, and were slowly moving back as the blood wolf mixed breed stepped forward. Some people had gone to carry anything they could use as a weapon, even though they knew it was futile when facing a mixed breed. Gustav observed the creature for a few more seconds. I can take it, he said internally, but before he could step forward, someone ran to his front from behind. She stood in front of him. It was a beautiful teenage girl sporting silver and pink hair. Angie, what are you doing? Gustav exclaimed after noticing that it was Angie. I will take it until the cops arrive. Please get the others to safety, Angie said with a fierce look. At this moment there was no smile on her face. She looked even more strong-willed than the men around. Before Gustav could reply to her, she had already dashed towards the blood wolf mixed breed. The blood wolf mixed breed also ran towards her after noticing that it had a challenger. Gustav wanted to stop Angie earlier on, but he noticed something. Swoosh! He noticed that Angie's speed was almost as fast as his. The people in the vicinity also didn't try to stop Angie, which was surprising to Gustav also. Emergency quest has been issued. Gustav suddenly saw a notification appear in his line of sight. Emergency quest, protect the neighborhood, emergency quest rewards, hidden, punishment for failing quest, hidden. Gustav was surprised again to see this quest as he had never been given such a quest before. Wait, protect the neighborhood? Gustav thought internally. That means the system wants me to defeat this mixed breed. Gustav came to this conclusion after seeing the quest. This was his plan initially, but Angie had already taken the initiative, and wanted to drag out the fight till the cops got here because she knew she wouldn't be able to defeat it, and she thought no other person around here would be able to defeat it either. As Gustav was in his thoughts, a battle was already playing out in front. Angie was faster than the mixed breed from the first exchange observed, and one could see that she seemed pretty experienced. Slash! Slash! The blood wolf kept slashing at her, but its claws kept passing through the wind generated from her body movement. Angie jumped around the place, dodging the attacks of the mixed breed with ease, but she wasn't able to cause it any damage even if she tried. Dash! Why are the cops not here yet? Dash! Those bastards won't arrive until we're all dead! People lamenting from the background could be heard as the fight between Angie and the mixed breed continued. Angie's parents and her siblings watched from the background with worried expressions. They would have gone to stop the battle if it was possible, but they knew how stubborn their daughter was when it came to this kind of situation. Trying something like that now might even get her killed, so they kept calling the cops to arrive as fast as they could. The battle went on for about 5 minutes, and Gustav noticed that the mixed breed was getting fiercer and fiercer while Angie was getting slower and slower. She must be running out of stamina. Gustav noticed this and was about to step in when the large blood wolf suddenly leaped several meters over Angie's body and landed in front of a man watching on the sidelines. The sudden action surprised Angie, as she had not expected the blood wolf to just leap over her head. The man, who was holding on to a large metal pipe, was scared shitless when the wolf landed in front of him. He couldn't even swing the weapon he was holding. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.